People have different political opinions. And what you find is that a lot of political opinions are uninformed, especially among young people. They're just parroting what they learned somewhere else or what they heard somewhere else.
Yeah.
Once you put a ring on your finger, once you bring a child into the world, once you birth a business, all of a sudden you're very invested in the world around you.
Yeah.
And your political opinion changes. I'm sorry, but when you're 24 years old and you're going to some college that mom and dad paid for, you don't get that yet.
No, they're making decisions based off of headlines and not digging into the facts to be able to make very informed decisions.
You cannot trust mainstream media for two important reasons. First, mainstream media is a for-profit business.
Yes.
It's not there to serve you. It's not that the government tells the media what to say. That's baloney. People believe that it's too big of a job. When there's truly a breaking story, they have to serve that up first to the Department of Justice, or they have to serve it to the President of the United States. They have to serve it through the executive branch to make sure that national security interests are protected.
Well, you and your wife are both ex-CIA officers. When you look at the news and you see headlines, what do you guys do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So CIA taught us two important things about headlines, right? First,
I'll be honest, I didn't expect us to talk about as much the faith aspect because I wasn't very familiar with where you stood in faith.
every day he just demonstrated to me what a faithful Christian looks like. You cannot ignore an example like that. That's what made me question everything about my childhood.
Hey guys, welcome back. I am super excited about today. It's a special episode. We got a lot of awesome stuff to talk about. We have Andrew Bustamante here. Andrew, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here, Chad. Man, you got an awesome mission. You have an awesome show. You have an awesome nonprofit. And it's going to be an awesome conversation because everything happening in the world right now is just so important to talk about. And one of the things I really value about you is you talk about everything faith first, right?
Yeah.
It's faith forward. And that is the lens we have to look at everything through. And I'll be honest, man, I've been on hundreds of podcasts. Nobody talks through that lens of faith first.
Yeah, I think, like everybody has their lens that they look through the world at. I like to look at things by someone who's believes I was created, and I believe that there's a very intentional plan for the world. I believe God's hand's providential. I like to look at the world through a biblical worldview. It gives me hope, and it makes me see things in a more optimistic way.
Well, what's beautiful is it's not just you, right? That's your personal experience.
Yeah.
But when you apply that biblical worldview to anybody, it can give anybody hope. It can give anyone structure.
Yeah.
It can give anyone validation, right? We're not the first ones to struggle through this world. It's a fallen world.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. That's what it's going to be until the day we die. It's a
right.
struggle until it's not a struggle anymore.
Yeah. A lot of our adversaries in the world, or particularly people of faith, maybe not the same faith as me. I believe, a lot of the faith ideologies that are adversaries are straight out of the pit of hell. However, it is a factor.
Yeah.
Like when you look at the jihadist movement and you look at, people like in Germany right now calling for the caliphate. These are people that see the world through a lens of faith and spirituality. And if you're not, as someone who's going to be resilient, if you're not looking through a faith lens and your adversary is, you're missing like a very important angle. I mean, I look back at my time in Afghanistan and fighting the Taliban, like we outclassed them in everything. Technology, like equipment, resources, we controlled the air. I remember the first time I put my hands on a Taliban guy, like it felt like I grabbed hold of a little kid, like I'm going to tear this guy to pieces. Like we're better than them in every area, except their spiritual resiliency. As flawed as it may be, they were fighting with the spiritual resiliency, seeing life eternal, and they fought that way, and that gave them an edge. That's why ultimately, they're still there.
One of the things that CIA teaches us very early in our training is that there's 4 different motivations, right? And that the 4 motivations break down into an acronym RICE, RICE. They stand for reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. But when you talk about that religious power, that drive that comes from your spirituality, you're hitting on the strongest of the 4 motivations,
right,
ideology.
The RICE acronym doesn't put them in priority, right?
Correct.
If you reprioritize them, the ideology comes first.
Bingo. And that's what's so powerful, right? Why is Israel as powerful as it is? Because it's a religious country. They don't separate church and state, right? They are, at their core, a theocracy, right? Why is Iran such a viable enemy? Because they are a religious country. Why are Israel and Iran at war right now? Because it's literally 2 religious-driven spiritual arguments that have lasted centuries, right? And that's the Taliban is the same way. ISIS was the same way. I mean, when you think about a true conflict, the stronger ideology wins. Why did the Americans win the American Revolution? Because we were fighting for independence All the British were fighting for were extra taxes.
Yeah.
Right. You can't. There's no competition there.
Motivation's not there, especially on the ground troops. Right.
Exactly.
Not there.
Right. Someone's got to pick up the musket. Someone's got to pick up the knife. Someone's got to wear the bomb. That's the person who's got the stronger ideology.
Yeah. While we're there, I think it's interesting, the Rice acronym, when you prioritize it, right? Ideology is first, but ego is second.
Exactly.
Ego is a powerful factor.
And what's fascinating to me is, I always thought ego was a bad thing, right? Before CIA, I was like, oh, ego's a bad thing. Don't have an ego. Don't trust people who have an ego. Egotism is a problem. Ego is much more than just being egotistical.
Yeah.
Right. Egotistical means that you think your ego is more important than anybody else's. Like you are more important. Ego just means how you craft the way the world views you. Mm-hmm. Every one of us has an ego. Mother Teresa had an ego. She wanted the world to see her sacrifice. She wanted the world to see her the way that she subjected herself to the poor and the needy. She wanted the world to see that because she had a message, an ideology that was driving and shaping her ego.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing's true for any politician, any celebrity, anything else. They're just shaping a narrative around themselves. That's all your ego is, whether it's a ego that you're proud of or whether it's an ego that society accepts. But nevertheless, it's a powerful motivator. If I validate the ego that you're trying to build, if I compliment your beautiful blue eyes, that makes you feel good.
I feel handsome right now. Well, I think it's interesting in the acronym as you prioritize it is that the last one or the least influenceable is coercion.
It's coercion.
Yeah, and we think that we could force people into things. And I mean, I know like a lot of guys that are human side are going in and working sources and developing sources. You think that you could actually coerce someone in, but that's the last like viable option.
It's the least resilient, the least consistent, the least reliable, because once you force someone to take action, once you guilt or shame or humiliate or force someone into a decision, they'll never trust you again.
Yeah.
It's so much more powerful to get someone to do something they already want to do or get someone to do something they believe is in line with their ideology, because they'll do it over and over and over again, right? They're malleable, or what many people would call manipulatable, right? Once you force somebody at gunpoint to say something or write something down, they will never let you do that to them again.
Yeah, it's kind of like marriage, right? You say your wife or husband would never like force you to become the wife or husband they want to be. You can't force that. I think reward too is something that as Americans we lose sight of. I remember when they put when I was out on that JSOC task force and we were looking for bin Laden and they had the $25 million reward out, and I said, man, somebody's going to turn him in at first. And then once I got to realize who the Afghan people were, I'm like, these people don't care about $25 million. So they could light a fire with it. Like,
do they even believe that it's real?
Yeah.
If you put a $25 million bounty on someone's head in the United States, most Americans would look at that and say, that's not real.
Yeah.
First of all, $25 million isn't real. No one's going to give me $25 million. Even if I do turn this guy in, the $25 million is going to be spread out over 30 years of payments where I always have to pay 35% taxes. Like there's going to be some catch.
Right.
And it's definitely not worth me risking my life to turn in this other person, right? So if that's how an American would think, I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's why I know I turned him in. No, I mean, in all those years, no one ratted him out. Well, you're known primarily for your background in the CIA, and you run this company called EverydaySpy. So you're like the everyday spy guy. What's the work up to going there, going through the military, growing up? Did you ever want to be a spy as a kid? Like, how'd you end up becoming the everyday spy?
I'm willing to bet that my childhood was like most American boys, at least.
Yeah.
Right? Especially children of the 80s like us. You got, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a police officer. I want to be a soldier. I want to be a spy. That's what we all want to be.
Sure, yeah.
Until our parents kind of tell us over time, you're not going to be that. You got to go to college. You got to do this. You got to do that, right? And then we start chasing girls in middle school and high school, and you get into chess club and you start doing marching band and whatever girls are doing, that's what you're doing too, right? So I very much started in this foundation of wanting to serve. And I'm a first generation American citizen. My mother served in the military. All of my aunts and uncles served in the military. All of my closest cousins have all gone on into the military. In fact, most of us went to military academies because we grew up poor. And when you grow up poor, you're always looking for how can I earn my way into college rather than have my way into college just bought for me. So the Air Force Academy was my stepping stone to get out of poor rural life in Pennsylvania and try to change my own life, to try to make a better future for my family and my future family. And that's how I got into the military. And then honestly, probably 12 hours into my military experience, I knew the military was not a good fit.
Yeah.
Didn't take long. It was a bus ride from the airport to the Air Force Academy. And people in uniform started yelling at me, and I had to sit on the front 1/3 of my seat, and I started getting asked questions that I didn't know the answer to. And they knew I didn't know the answer, but they kept yelling at me anyways, like I knew the answer. And I was like, I am in for a world of hurt right now.
Yeah.
But no matter what pain is ahead of me, it's better than the pain I had behind me. So I'm just going to keep charging forward, right? And that's been my military attitude ever since, right? All through the Air Force Academy, all through active duty. I always knew I wasn't a good fit for the military, man. I mean, just look at me. I got a beard. I've got, a permanent perm. This is, the military is not a good fit for me. And when I had to shine shoes and iron my clothes and make sure that my name tag was balanced for anybody who's getting, traumatic memories themselves, because they're like, oh, I remember all that, right? It's like, it was tough.
So you say you're first generation American. What ethnicity are you?
So I'm 3/4 Mexican and 1/4 Navajo Indian.
Okay.
So, and I come from Mexico. The northern part of Mexico is where my grandmother and my grandfather essentially came from.
Yeah.
Everybody relocated to El Paso, Texas, and that was kind of where our U.S. journey started as a family. And then we've spread since then. Now we've got family in Arizona and Texas and Pennsylvania. And what's really funny to me is we are an immigrant family,
right?
And the vast majority of my family is heavily conservative. Because they know what they came from,
right?
And they want to keep that from happening in the United States.
Yeah, I got a lot of friends got a lot of Cuban friends, a lot of friends from Venezuela. Man, they're so active in a selection right now, especially my friends from Venezuela, because most of them were political refugees.
Yep.
We have a guy who works on the Mighty Oak staff, and his father was a general in the Venezuelan military, and he was an instructor at military free fall school in Venezuela, but they had to flee here, and they're like, man. He's die hard pro-Trump.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because, growing up in Pennsylvania, I grew up in a conservative part of Pennsylvania too. But, as you grow older, as you go through college, especially when you go into the military, you start being exposed to more diverse political thought.
Yeah.
And people have different political opinions. And what you find is that a lot of political opinions are uninformed, especially among young people. Mm-hmm. They're just parroting what they learned somewhere else or what they heard somewhere else. They're not vested in the future of the country yet.
Yeah.
Once you put a ring on your finger, once you bring a child into the world, once you birth a business, all of a sudden you're very, very invested in the world around you.
Yeah.
And your political opinion changes because now all of a sudden you realize you have a responsibility to protect what you've brought into the world and to safeguard its future. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but when you're 24 years old and you're going to some inner city college that mom and dad paid for, you don't get that yet.
No, you don't. Honestly, it's one of the reasons I started this show. And one of the reasons that I know a lot of podcasters, I'm really good friends with Sean Ryan. I know you have your own podcast. A lot of the podcasters have felt like the mainstream media and journalism had died and the public was not getting informed. So they're making decisions based off of headlines and not digging into the facts to be able to make very informed decisions about voting and how to be involved in their community. And so that's why bringing on guests like you and some of the stuff we're going to talk about and some of the other guests I've had to talk about things that help inform people to make decisions as a citizen to protect the future of this country. I think it's very important. And one of my main motivations for doing this show.
And honestly, man, it's why I love talking to folks like you. It's why I love talking with folks like Sean, because that independent commitment to journalism, to keeping the idea at least of journalism alive is so important. Because the truth is, and people don't realize it, you and I have served in the U.S., we've served abroad, we've run influence campaigns, we have intentionally lied to adversarial forces to get them to crumble on their own, right? It's a Chinese art of war type of thing, right? If you can get your enemy to fight themselves, you don't have to die fighting your enemy, right? You can't trust mainstream media. You cannot trust mainstream media for two important reasons. First, mainstream media is a for-profit business. Yes. It's not there to serve you. It's there to make money. It needs to sell ads. It needs to get clicks. It needs to keep you so glued, so interested, so engaged that you're just going to keep clicking, keep scrolling, and they're going to keep serving ads. Mm-hmm. So they're not interested in telling you what you need to know. They're interested in telling you what they want to tell you to get you to keep scrolling and keep reading. That's the first reason you can't trust them. The second reason you can't trust them is because they are being overseen. They have to be shepherded. They have to be governed by policy, which is shaped by the federal government. So it's not that the government tells the media what to say. That's baloney. People believe that it's too big of a job. The government doesn't have time to tell the Washington Post or the New York Times what to say. All the government has to do is say, hey, Washington Post, if you say something that we think could be propaganda for Iran, we're going to penalize you. We're going to shut you down. We're going to arrest your CEO. We're going to send the FBI in to investigate. That's enough of a threat.
Parameters on them.
That's enough of a threat to make sure that the Washington Post or the New York Times doesn't ever go down that road. And then for an active investigation, I guess there's technically 3 reasons. The third reason why you can't trust the mainstream media is because when there's truly a breaking story, they have to serve that up first to the Department of Justice, or they have to serve it to the chief executive officer, the president of the United States. They have to serve it through the executive branch to make sure that national security interests are protected. So consider a corrupt politician in Dallas. They can't, the mainstream media isn't going to tell the public about a corrupt politician in Dallas. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to run that up to the FBI and say, hey, we think we have evidence about a corrupt politician. And then FBI is going to say, thank you for that. Don't talk about it in the press. We're going to investigate it. And that turns into a 2-year investigation. Meanwhile, this corrupt politician gets to continue running, but FBI gets to build a case. So the American people don't get to know what's really happening because the FBI needs to build a case so that they can prosecute that politician in 2 years. Expand that anywhere you want to talk about it. Expand that to Iran. Expand that to terrorist operations in the United States. Expand that to border security operations. Like, the mainstream media can't talk about it. Independent media can.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, podcasts and stuff are blowing up because people don't trust mainstream media anymore, and they're starting to trust independent.
And they're starting to realize they can't trust it. Not only are there 3 very viable reasons, right? Like building a case, protecting your business, right? Continuing on with supporting national security. Not only are there reasonable reasons, but then you've also got just bias.
Sure.
The CNN wants to get more left-leaning viewers to view CNN. Fox News wants to get more right-leaning viewers to view Fox News. So they're pandering to their base, just like you see so often with politicians. Right. And it's English language. That means it's one language. We don't get the benefit of understanding what's happening in Al Jazeera, in Arabic, what's happening, in Chinese newspapers in Chinese, what's happening in Canadian newspapers in French. We don't get to know because our media is single language and we are a single language country.
What's your thoughts on the influence, like foreign influence through our media? So a lot of these, when you talked about like people are paying for these, like BlackRock's involved and George Soros. And so they have people that are influencing the media outside of the government, private citizens who are foreign. What I view that as is a globalist agenda to disrupt and divide Americans and destroy this country internally. Because you can't have a globalist agenda with America intact. Yeah. So how much of this is intentional to destroy our culture and the way of life in America?
Well, I think there's 2 things happening. First, I think that since the end of World War II and the rise of the United States, especially since the end of the Cold War and the rise of the United States as the monolithic single world superpower, all of the world is our enemy.
Yeah.
If people don't realize that yet, they need to wake up and realize that. When you're the top dog, every other dog wants you out.
Yeah.
That's the one thing they all agree on.
That's human nature, by the way. You go to elementary school with wrestling team, even your own team, like there's wrestle-offs. Like you want that seat. You want that top seat on the wrestling team. And at any moment, somebody else on the team could say, I want to wrestle for the spot. And if you're the top guy, everyone's coming at, which makes a wrestling team great because everyone knows that any moment their spot can be competed for.
Right. And they're still a team.
They're still a team, yeah.
So essentially that's what we should be doing internally. That's what we should be doing with politics. Make sure that only the best get an opportunity to compete for the best seat. That's not what we have with Kamala Harris, but that's all right. We'll talk about that some other time. But my point there is, in the United States is the top dog. Mm-hmm. So even though we call NATO allies and we call France an ally and we call Germany an ally and we call the UK an ally and we call Canada an ally,
they want our seat.
They all want our seat. And they will always want our seat until they get the seat. And then we'll want that seat too. And we will connive and we will steal and we will espionage our way to the top. That's why CIA exists, right? CIA exists specifically to break the 10 commandments and cheat our way to the top. Because once you're at the top, you have to hold the top because everybody's fighting against you. So when you talk about, foreign influence on media, absolutely foreign influence happens on media. It's state run, but it's also commercially run. It's also independently run. There's constant attacks, and social media just made it worse, right? Back before social media, when you and I grew up and mom and dad still just read the newspaper and watched the news at 5 p.m. Remember those days? There were still fake news stories then too.
Sure, yeah.
Right? It just took a little bit more work to get those news stories to cover the entire continent.
Yeah.
Where now it just takes a viral post.
We didn't have the ability to be able to bounce other ideas off because it was, you had like, when I grew up, there was like, six channels. Like you couldn't go fact check it on Google or look at other competing sources of information.
Right. And not only that, but the journalists didn't have that either.
Yeah.
Right. So a journalist who got a story on Monday morning, who wanted to break that story on Monday night, only had a limited ability to get 2 or 3 vetted sources to confirm or corroborate the story.
Right.
Where now they have an entire digital platform, a whole digital world that they can use that. Right. So imagine how much harder it was to be a journalist back then, how many fewer outlets there were for information to come in and out, but then also how much of news was local. It was the local rag, it was the local paper, it was local whatever. I mean, that's a fertile ground. So when we look at our social media feeds now, when we look at the websites that are our news accumulators, right? When we look at those now, you don't know where those news sources are coming from. You can click on the news app on your phone and you're going to see more news sources you've never heard of than news sources you have heard of. How do you know who to trust?
Well, you and your wife are both, ex-CIA officers. When you look at the news and you see headlines, what most people function off of headlines, what do you guys do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So CIA taught us 2 important things about headlines, right? First, headlines are generally alarmist. They're supposed to be something that trigger an emotional response in the reader that gets them to click on the larger story, right? So that's the first purpose of a headline, is it's to trigger an emotion that gets you to click. So whether that emotion is something outrageous like anger or sadness or shame or fear or whatever, a headline is there to get you to click. So you definitely can't trust the headline to be the news. The headline is there to get you to click so that you go into the news story. And then the first paragraph of the news story is really just there to get you to continue reading. So there's also no real value in the first paragraph. Real news is actually hidden in the last 5 paragraphs of any story. So if you really want to read the news and you really want to see what's happening in a story, go ahead and click on the headline. That's fine. Just skip to the last 5 paragraphs. Because inside those last 5 paragraphs, if it's 6 paragraphs long, the last 3 paragraphs, inside that is where you actually find the vetted true news.
What the statements there.
Yep. Where the editor had to say, yes, this information is vetted. That's in the bottom of the story. That's not in the top. Everything in the top half of the story is just there to get your attention. So CIA taught us, like, you can't trust a headline and you can't trust the first half of the news story, because all of that, no matter if it's in Chinese or Hindi or English, it's all make-believe. It's all just emotional, alarmist rhetoric to get a predisposed person to click and view. So you have to read the second half of the news, right? That's the first thing they taught us. The second thing they taught us is that you have to constantly read opposing forces. So if you're reading Fox, you need to read CNN.
Yeah.
If you're reading the Christian Science Monitor, you need to read Al Jazeera, right? You need to read opposing views, because what you're guaranteed is that they're going to be biased.
Sure.
So what you're looking for is where 2 biased sources that operate against each other, where they intersect, that's the truth. That's factual, right? So one person can say all the bad things they want to make you feel bad about Donald Trump. Somebody else can say all the bad things they want to make you feel bad about Kamala Harris. But when you find out in the middle that there's a tariff being levied against China on imported plastics, that's a fact, because it's free of bias and it's corroborated by an alternate source where you're sure that there's not circular reporting.
We say about, like, so a lot of times, like, I kind of recognize, with complete humility, recognize this platform that I've been given. I believe God's given me this platform to be responsible with it. I know if I say something now, that people are going to respond to it and act off of it, because people are tuning in to my Instagram, to this show for media. So I try to be very responsible with that. Like, I don't talk about things I don't know. If I'm going to give a statement, I want to research it, make sure. I don't want people just to trust me. I want people to, like you said, cross-examine. When I watch, for example, when I watch the debates, I watch the debate, and then instead of going to Fox News, I go to CNN. I'm a conservative, so I go to CNN to listen. I want to hear the other side. Yep. But so many people, like, and I appreciate the followers listening to us right now on this show, lean on guys like me, you, Sean Ryan, and say, hey, don't just trust one person.
Absolutely. If you want to show respect to our institutions as American citizens, the effort that you and I are putting into trying to build our businesses, if you want to respect and honor those things, don't just trust us.
Yeah.
Vet us. Validate against other news sources that what we're saying is true or not true. And don't just do it to us. Show honor and respect to yourself.
Yeah.
So that any information that comes to you, just question it all. Anything that comes out of my mouth, just by default, question it. Go out, find whether it's true or false, find whether there's corroborating information or dissenting information, and make your own conclusion. We are a country that has become a great country because we are independent. That means we're not red, we're not blue, we were born purple. The blood in our veins is purple first, right? That's how we run. We get to choose what we want. And guess what? Once you choose, you can choose policy to policy. You can choose day to day. You can choose month to month. You can choose whatever you want. You don't have to fit into some category forever. And what's so frustrating is our institutional government has embedded itself in these bicameral sides. You have to be a Republican or a Democrat. And being a Republican means this, being a Democrat means this. And then that forces all of us this artificial choice that we have to make we have to pick one side or the other.
Yeah.
The truth is, you do whatever's right for you, and you vote your conscience, right? You vote for the representative that presents the best plan for your future and what you value.
Yeah.
Whoever that person is, go with it.
Yeah, I get that so much. And it kind of frustrates me. People because of my conservative views and the things I speak about publicly, people would automatically assume and categorize me as a Republican. I've been accused of being a Republican. And the truth is, I will never behold to any political party. I'm beholding to policy.
The vast majority of the negative comments that I have, and I've got a lot of negative comments online, right? The vast majority accuse me of being a shill for the conservative party or like a blatant liberal.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the last 24 hours, I've seen comments blaming me of being both, accusing me of both. And I'm like, guys, that's just called independent thinking.
Yeah, because maybe you have one liberal policy and one conservative policy. I've gotten a little heat for this because I'm currently, in full disclosure, I'm a veterans policy surrogate for President Trump's campaign. I was in 2020. I am again. And because I love his policy for veterans. I think he has the best policy for veterans, so I could speak on that. But if someone, I'm also a Christian, if someone says, man, President Trump is pro-life, I'll say, actually, no, he's not. He's not pro-life. He's not a pro-life candidate. We don't have a pro-life candidate. We have one that's full-term abortion. We have one that's 15 weeks abortion. By the way, 95% of the abortions happen in the first 15 weeks. So President Trump is not a pro-life candidate. And people are like, why are you saying that? You're working against it. I'm like, no, I'm a policy person. And so I'm going to speak in truth and policy, and I'm going to vote according to that. Now, on the issue of life, I'm going to vote for President Trump on that policy because it's the lesser of evils for what I believe in my biblical worldview on the right for life. But I think people get so party line voting, and it's harmful.
And we have to remember that is artificial. That's not something we chose, right?
Right.
You didn't choose to wake up and only have 2 different coffees that you drink.
No.
Right? You want a choice. You didn't choose I'm only going to eat chicken or beef. You can eat you can choose anything you want. It's an artificial boundary, an artificial barrier that's been put out there by what we call at CIA, we call social conditioning. We have been socially conditioned that we have to pick sides.
Yeah, we're in this camp or this camp.
And I mean, even going back to elementary school, you're either the kid in line during daycare, you're the good kid because you're standing in line, or you're the problem child because you're not standing in line. Camps. Which camp do you want to be part of, right? How do you want to grow up? What do you want your mom to say? What would your dad think right now? We've been conditioned by this idea of either following protocol or rebelling against protocol. So are we really so surprised that now that we're 49 years old, 48 years old, 56 years old, 65 years old, that it still basically boils down to, are you going to stand in line in daycare or are you going to be a problem child? That's still how we're categorized.
I've always been a problem child. I'm a kid till now. I still am now.
And it's funny because I don't think either one of us are truly problem children.
Yeah.
We just don't want to stand in line. So where's the third category? I'll still wash my hands. I'll still take the nap at nap time. I just don't want to stand in that stupid line because the guy behind me keeps bumping into me and the girl in front of me keeps farting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There should be another option. I want to circle back on some of this, but how do you get into the CIA? Everybody has this kind of recruiting, right? You were recruited. I was talking to Sarah Adams, who was on the show, and I'm like, tell us your story. And she's like, well, it's not super sexy. I went online and applied online. You could actually, the CIA has a website and you could actually apply for a job online. But I'm sure everybody goes in agency. Some people recruit it, and some people apply online.
There's a lot of different ways. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways into CIA. And, shout out to Sarah Adams. Sarah's a great friend, a great former officer. She's doing great things right now. So I love seeing her success. And we met for the first time in some Vienna, Virginia dinner restaurant it was as former CIA colleagues. It was pretty funny, but it's just awesome to see both of us.
She got the best nickname too. Super bad.
But yeah, so my story came a little bit different than most. I was actually in the military, in the Air Force, and I was getting ready to leave. I had already put in my paperwork to leave the Air Force, and I was looking for what I was going to do next. And just like getting out of any bad relationship, I was 27 years old. So when you break up with a girl at 27, the next girl you date is the total opposite of the last girl you dated, right? We're always looking for 180-degree difference.
Yeah.
Even though we really only need somebody who's 5 or 10 degrees different, right? Just 1 or 2 things were off. Instead, we go for the exact opposite. I was dating a tall blonde. Now I want a short brunette. And it's funny. But I was in the Air Force. I was struggling to shave every day. I had to polish my shoes every day. I couldn't grow my hair very long. I wore the same uniform. What's 180 degrees different from that? The Peace Corps.
Yeah.
I didn't have to wear shoes. I could grow my beard out. I could grow my hair. I didn't even have to shower, right? Plus, every girl I met in the Peace Corps was probably going to be ideologically aligned with the idea of free love and save the world and whatever else. So, I mean, that was my goal in life at 27. So I'm sitting there in the computer lab, because back then we had computer labs. People didn't have their own computers. I'm sitting in the computer lab in uniform in my final months of the Air Force, applying for the Peace Corps. And halfway through that application process, a big blue screen pops up that says, hey, based on your answers, you may be qualified for other lines of work in the federal government. Are you willing to put your application on hold for 72 hours so that a recruiter can contact you? I'm 27 years old. I'm single. I'm leaving the Air Force. I mean, my head is full of dreams. So of course, I'm like, yes, I will pause my application for 72 hours so that your recruiter can call me.
Sure.
And then 24 hours later, I get a call from area code 703. I didn't know what that meant at the time. Mm-hmm. That's the Langley, Virginia area code.
Yeah.
And on the other end of the line is a woman who gives me a first name, and she tells me that I might qualify for a role in national security after she verifies that I am the same person that was online with the Peace Corps. And if I'm open to it, she would overnight me airplane tickets, reservations, and a car rental plan. And I was like, sure.
These people are serious.
Well, yeah. Or this is a crank call and I'll know in 24 hours.
Sure.
Right? Because nothing's going to show up overnight. But then something did show up overnight. And then I went to the airport and it was a valid ticket. And then I got to the airport and there was a valid car rental. And then I got to the hotel and it was a real hotel room. And I was like, this is interesting. And then I went to that first interview.
Put a hood over your head and there was a valid hood over your head. Drug you off into interview.
Exactly. But so my path very much came in. I was trying to get into something else. And I was rerouted. And there's a number of us that are rerouted, right? Some people are trying to go to Health and Human Services. Some people are trying to go into NSA. Some people are trying to go into FBI. And our applications get rerouted because all the government agencies all share. And when you're coming from the military especially, or when you're like me coming from the military, they've had my entire life recorded, right? I went to a military college. I had to give that military college all of my medical records from before. Like they knew me. They knew me inside and out. They knew everything that I had been through. They knew my educational record. They knew what languages I spoke. They knew my physical fitness level. I was not a surprise. But then there's always that person who gets into the agency from some way that you would have never imagined. Somebody who used to sell flashlights and they came across somebody in a coffee shop and that person in the coffee shop was like, hey, here's my card. Call me when you can. And that becomes a nomination for CIA position. So people come in from all over the place.
Did you do the job you were recruited to do? Did you do something else? What job did you end up doing?
So one of the things that's really interesting is CIA doesn't actually recruit you to do a job. Okay. They recruit you according to a set of standards that fit you into different classifications, right? Technical officer, analytical officer, clandestine officer, et cetera. So they have a rough idea of what you might fit into as a category. But then you go through a personality battery, you go through interview panelist testing, and you go through a number of different levels of interview. You go through polygraphs. And as they find out empirically who you are, meaning they can test your psychology, they can test your personality, then they actually have a better idea of what job position they want you to have. So at the end of all of that process, which takes anywhere from 9 to 18 months, that's when they give you what's known as a conditional offer of employment, a COE. And in that conditional offer, they say, we would like for you to be XYZ, to start on this day, to make this much money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you say yes to that conditional offer of employment, then you go into that category, and then your training for that category starts. So I was brought on board just to be a person. As my personality testing went through, they identified me for National Clandestine Service, what was called NCS at the time. My conditional offer of employment came in as a GS7, I think it was back then.
Which is pretty low pay.
Super low pay. But I didn't care because I was like, oh, I'm going to get tuxedos and Lamborghinis and this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. It's just low pay.
Yeah.
And then training starts from there. So then after they say, we think you'd be a good fit for this personality-wise and psychologically, then you have to prove yourself educationally and physically to be able to keep up with the training. And that was my whole path.
And that's at the farm.
That's at the farm.
Yeah. How long? Can you say how long are you there?
You know, it's funny. I was told that the length of farm is still classified, but I've seen it published a number of times. So I'll just say that it's less than a year and it's longer than 3 months.
Yeah.
It's inside that squishy zone.
Yeah.
And if you read it somewhere else, at least you didn't hear it from me.
Yeah. And as obviously whatever your job you end up doing, there's lots of follow-on training, right? You're continually training and getting.
Correct. And that's funny because we call it the farm. You would think that a farm is a place where animals go just until they're slaughtered.
Yeah.
Our farm, like you go back to the farm over and over again. You go back for advanced training, you go back for refresher training. It's really more of our central training hub than anything else.
How much of your actual job can you talk about what you actually did in the agency?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was what's known as a staff operations officer. Operations officers are all the people who handle the collection of foreign intelligence. And you've got various tasks that go into that. Sometimes you're meeting with sources, sometimes you're developing sources, sometimes you're handling reporting, sometimes you're handling like administrative or logistics. I started very much in that core collector role, collecting information from sources, aggregating information from multiple sources, submitting that to analysts to create synthesized analysis that goes to the president. That's where I started. And then I actually ended my career doing covert action with Air Branch, as I mentioned to you, with Special Activities Group, or Special Activities Division at the time. And I was also one of the agency's briefers for Congress and congressional staffers. So a big part of where I learned public speaking was speaking to hostile congressional reps who were asking questions that they weren't allowed to know the answer to.
Yeah, for those listening, many may know or may not know, in this CIA's paramilitary side is you have a ground branch, maritime branch, air branch, which is like, you know, when I would imagine what I would want to do at the CIA, that's where that's where the action happens. And so to be at air branch, you know, that is a pretty prestigious accomplishment, and I'm sure you got to do a lot of great work there. Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, you're totally right. There's a reason that we call it covert action, because it's where all the action happens, and it's all plausibly deniable by the president, right? It's a important, viable job. It's critical to national security, but it's different, very different than your traditional intelligence collection jobs, because your traditional intelligence collection is usually supposed to be void of action. Because if there's action happening, then you don't look like you're undercover anymore. Right. You don't look clandestine. You're not there in secret anymore. Once you start shooting, banging, or blowing up, people know you're there. So traditional clandestine operations are very much about getting in and getting out and getting the information you need without anybody ever knowing it happened. Yeah. If there's action, then you probably did something wrong. Correct. Yeah. For the citizens of America listening right now, who most people probably don't know what the CIA's role actually is the Central Intelligence Agency structured to only do operations OCONUS outside of continental United States? Or is there Central Intelligence Agency operations that are happening in the United States? So it's a great question, and it's a huge misnomer for people, because so much of what we understand is shaped by media. So the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, is the central repository of intelligence analysis. That's where the central intelligence comes from. It means that all intelligence agencies, what we call the IC, the intelligence community, which includes all of DOD, NSA, FBI, NRO, NGA, everything, you name it, right? Even IRS has a counterintelligence arm that creates intelligence that gets filed into CIA archives. So at the center of this giant intelligence community is the Central Intelligence Agency, which was really only created in like the 1940s, I want to say, so that it could create a single brief that goes to the chief executive of the country, the president. And that is the president's daily brief. So all source information is centralized, synthesized, analyzed, and turned into a readable format that goes to the president every day with the president's daily brief. That's what CIA was built to do. Now, he could take action off of that. Yeah, and so he could make policy decisions off of that.
Now, over time, what happened is CIA also expanded into other areas of utility because it became an agency of last resort. Meaning when DOD couldn't do it, when NSA couldn't do it, when DIA couldn't do it, when FBI couldn't do any mission, CIA became that agency of last resort. So at that time,
which is why we call covert action the third option, right? You get diplomacy, military action, covert action is like
exactly.
Yeah, that's
the third option, the last option, right? That was traditionally how it was viewed. So it became this agency of last resort, which they then decided to split between a law enforcement element and a intelligence element. The law enforcement element of last resort went to FBI. Law enforcement means enforcing the laws of the land. So inside the continental United States, operations are governed by the FBI. Everywhere else in the world, it's the CIA, right? We're the agency of last resort outside, OCONUS. Does that mean CIA only runs operations overseas? No, it means CIA only runs primacy overseas. If CIA runs an operation in the United States, it has to be in concert with FBI, which usually works in concert with local police and local law enforcement.
JTTF or
right.
Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's agency representatives on those JTTF, which are, like you said, in conjunction with local law enforcement as well.
Right. The president, the institution of the president, the institution of the executive, the chief executive, created different presidential authorities. And those presidential authorities are really nothing more than carve-outs that allow federal agencies to break American laws. That's what an authority is, right? You and I as American citizens don't have any authorities. So we have to follow American law or else, deal with the consequences. CIA can break American laws. FBI can break American laws. NSA can break American laws. All the intelligence community has certain authorities granted to them, which allow them a legal carve-out to break a certain law in order to serve national security interests. So for example, Border Patrol and Customs and Border, they are able to actually clone any device at the border, whether it's an American citizen or a foreign citizen. They can clone a device at the border. That's one of the authorities granted to them, even though it breaks privacy laws under US laws, right? But the reason they have that authority is because there are times when it's in the best interest of national security to clone a device surreptitiously, clandestinely, without the owner knowing it. CIA can't do that. FBI can't do that. DIA can't do that. Marine Corps can't do that, but Customs and Border can. And then with that information, they can send that to the CIA, where FBI sends different intel, where NSA sends different intel, all according to their different authorities. And now CIA can create a packet of truly secret information that gets shared with the president about any number of national security issues.
When I was at JSOC, a lot of our operations internationally had bad actors that were in the United States. And so there was, sometimes we would have some of our operations would happen here in the United States. But there was a lot of training and some strict protocols. One was called posse comitatus laws, right, which prohibited U.S. military from collecting on a private citizen, taking action against a private citizen, even taking a picture of a license plate of a private citizen. Do those same laws extend to the Central Intelligence Agency?
Absolutely. And it's one of the things that people don't realize is that operations in the United States are so difficult because our laws protect citizens first.
Right.
Well, we're also one of the only countries in the world where anybody can become a citizen. So bad actors, it's so frustrating. That's exactly right, right? Like somebody with nefarious intent just has to find a legitimate job or even make a legitimate job, spend 3, 5, 7 years here, file for a green card, whatever else. They can be here under no intentions of ever being a contributing member to society. They're there specifically to do harm to the United States. But if we want to collect against that individual, we fall under a strict rubric of laws, including like telling that person who we really are affiliated with if we ever actually talk to them in person.
Much different than the Kremlin or ISI or, foreign intelligence agencies, right? They completely, collect on their citizens.
Right. There's secret police in most authoritarian countries. There are no secret police in the United States. Yes, I get conspiracy theorists will say that there are. In reality, the vast majority of money and effort goes into doing it legally, because at the end of the day, we can't take illegal action unless we can show through a series of legal steps in front of a court of law that the repercussions that we're seeking are viable, right?
And even with all that, the American people, large in part, has lost trust in the federal government. especially our three-letter agencies, including the CIA. How do we get that back? Like, I think it's important for the American people to have trust in our federal agencies, especially our three-letter agencies, and feel like, because the truth is, even with the things we're talking about, at least I personally believe that many three-letter agencies have been weaponized against citizens and have certainly been weaponized against political opponents. So how do we, with all that's happened, how do we regain the trust from the American people?
Yeah, there's a couple things working against us. First, these are secret organizations. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always going to be secrets, and nobody trusts somebody else who they know has secrets that they don't have.
Sure.
Right? Like, secrets keep us apart. Mm-hmm. They don't bring us together. Even though we all have secrets,
right?
We could bond over the fact that we all have secrets.
Even though it's necessary.
Right.
It's very necessary for the CIA to have secrets.
Absolutely. And everybody, right? It's necessary for Iran to have its secrets. We shouldn't distrust them just because they have secrets. We shouldn't distrust our neighbor just because they have secrets. But we do. That's human nature, going back to what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So that's working against us at all times. CIA is always going to be a secret organization. The American people are never going to know what CIA really is, what CIA really knows. So we have to accept that. The second thing working against us, though, is the fact that, just like you said, we have developed a proven track record of abusing the authorities that are granted to us, abusing the interests of the American people, being used and leveraged and weaponized for various reasons. Right? Yeah. We've demonstrated that, not just in the last 5 years, for like 50 years.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so, this isn't just a President Trump thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So just like an abused child takes time before they trust their parents again, it's going to take time for the American people to gain trust back in those three-letter agencies. But those three-letter agencies have to mature.
Let's just say what has to happen, right? Like, I mean, you look at right now, President Trump, one of the things President Trump is talking about if he comes back in office is bringing Elon Musk in to do like an inventory and just like clean house. Like, I mean, and I don't know what that looks like, but what do you think just hypothetically would have to happen to clean those 8 organizations up?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is an independent civilian panel granted security clearances.
Yeah,
could do a great deal of improvement in a very short period of time. But that is so countercultural to anything in the government, because the government still believes, people need to understand the government is at all times 10 to 20 years behind the civilian population. Right. I remember.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like what computer system do you think is still running government computers right now?
Yeah.
Probably one from like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The missile silos that we operate with our nuclear missiles were all approved in the 90s.
Okay.
Right. And the generation before they were upgraded was the 70s. Right. So things move very, very slowly in government because there's so much bureaucracy. There's so much red tape. There's so much money that things are always behind.
This is why the JSOC units are using civilian equipment and stuff like that.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons that we see such a push towards civilian contractors, civilian technical solutions, is because government solutions just take too long.
Yeah.
But the government is trapped in that world. So in the eyes of your typical government employee, and keep in mind, your typical government employee starts as a junior and then rises through the ranks after a 30-year career to become the senior decision maker. Well, they're not getting a 30-year modernized experience. They're getting 30 years of archaic, slow bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. So even when they're in a position to make decisions, they don't make fast decisions.
Right.
Right. So the government is always 15 to 20 years behind modern day civilian technology, decision-making processes, best practices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Government comes to criminals to learn how to fight criminals. Mm-hmm. Government comes to civilian contractors to do government jobs. Government comes to civilian experts to gain insight to improve the government. Like Deloitte and CACI and Booz Allen are all civilian consultancies hired by the government to try to make the government manage better, handle, HR better, do better accounting. Because the government doesn't do it on its own.
A funny story about that. I was going through this program that the agency ran, and it was a loan operator program. It was like a 4-week course, and the streetcraft instructor was a former Hell's Angel that had done like major time in prison. And I was like, this guy was like pretty rough, and this guy was the hired instructor for teaching to
teach you the skills you needed to know.
Yeah,
yep.
All the SDR stuff we got, surveillance detection routes and surveillance detection, like all the stuff I got before from the government have always been like, soft guys that went through training, yep. and then now they were taught and they did it, and then eventually coming back and teach. But this guy was like straight out of the Hell's Angels, and he was like,
and it was great training.
It was great training. I did another course, a vehicle commandeering course, And it's basically how to select and steal a car. Like you think you steal a car, right? I'm going to get a Lamborghini or something. No, get a looking for the Honda Civic. It's easy to break into. There's a lot of them. And it was a guy from had a guy from like downtown LA, some guy, former gang member, teaching us how to break the steering column and to hotwire under the hood, under the dash, and so it's like pretty crazy that
it's true. And then
some of these guys.
So when you think about it through that lens, when you think about how slow the government changes and the government adapts, if you expect the government to change on its own, keep hoping, because the government can't skip 20 years forward. They're always going to be 20 years back. So if you want to know, your original question, how do we change this anytime soon? You need a civilian panel. You need people who
Elon Musk is not a bad thing.
No, not at all. Yeah. Right? If anything, what we need to be prepared for two things. First, we need to be prepared to let civilians get security clearances so that they can review clandestine or top secret records. They need to be able to do that. But then second, we also need to be ready for the findings that community is going to have. Because here's what I know for a fact. Probably 70% of what CIA classifies should never be classified. We have a massive overclassification problem. And that's just not CIA, that's DOD as well.
For sure.
Right? Yeah. Everything is overclassified because the idea in the government is it's better to overclassify something and simply declassify it later than underclassify something that causes a national security risk.
And the later ends up being later,
or
50,
never
60, 70 years ever. Yeah.
Exactly. Where the average American is like, hey, I deserve to know because my tax dollars pay for the operations. My children go to public schools. I contribute to the GDP. Like, I have a right to know what's happening in my country. I have a right to know what the national threats are, or the national security threats are facing me. And that American citizen is 100% correct.
Yeah.
They have a right to know. The breakdown is on the government side, because you have people who don't really know what's okay or what's not okay, and they're all focused on their career. Because don't forget, a government employee is a careerist. So they're trying to protect this tour so they can get the next tour, so they can get the next promotion, so they can finish the next end of year report or EAP and look good. So
as much as a public servant as they may be, their career is always coming first.
Right.
It's human nature. Right?
So what are you going to do? Are you going to overclassify a document and then show that you finished 50 reports that week? Or are you going to underclassify a document and run the risk of your boss saying that you made a mistake and then you don't get the promotion?
Yeah.
It's systemic. Government employees just do what they're supposed to do. And then every year that you stay in government is a year that you are that much more vested in the government process.
Yes.
So then it's not like you're going to change suddenly after 10 years. If anything, after 10 years, you're going to become that much more predictably bureaucratic.
Man, I'm so encouraged to hear you say that, because that's the inclination I had, was to believe that when they talked about Elon Musk coming in and he's like, hey, there's thousands of government agencies. There probably needs to be less than 100. And you could probably cut, I think 70% of the government, like, and some of these organizations and agencies, like, I got excited about that. I mean our government's too big and inefficient.
Our country was founded on business,
right?
And we forget that. The original pilgrims weren't just escaping religious persecution. There was an element of that.
Sure.
Those first pilgrims were contractors. They came to the conclusion that they couldn't become landowners in the United Kingdom, in Britain. So they signed a contract to come to the United States to create an economy in exchange for land and rights to what they grew. They were business people. They signed a contract. They were given a reward in exchange for their labor. That's how our business was. That's how our country was formed. The reason that the original people who could vote were land-owning males was because, according to the government we had at the time, unless you owned land, you weren't actually invested in the future of the country. Well, now our whole election cycle is totally bonkers.
Sure.
But now you can vote in some states you can vote and not even be an American citizen, it sounds like. But the idea of being invested in the future of the country is no longer present. So are we really surprised to see the kind of confusion that we have in the electoral cycle, the confusion that we have? It's so unpredictable how to choose who a president is. And we have this incredible divide, this incredible split in our country that essentially boils down to the people who want to see progressive change versus people who want to see slower change. That's really what the two parties represent. And it's just a debate over who's truly invested in the future versus who's distracted with what's trending right now.
Yeah, we come so far. I mean, like you said, not only do you not need to own land, you don't need to have a driver's license, or you don't even need to be alive in some cases.
It's wild, man.
You could be dead and vote. But
it's wild. And you can see how it mutates every 4 years.
Yeah. Well, we have to get control of our election system. I mean, the American people need that. American people need to have the confidence that they have an electorate voice. And that's a real scary thing right now. I mean, there's a lot of Americans right now that don't believe that they have they don't believe we're a constitutional republic anymore. They don't believe their voice or vote counts anymore. And that's a scary thing when a culture starts believing that.
Well, what's scary is that I can understand why they believe it, and they're not totally wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so frustrating, right? We are a representative republic, which means that we elect representatives to speak on our behalf. But how many different ways do you have to be watered down before you realize, like, 10 people's votes, that's a rounding error. Mm-hmm. Those 10 votes can be, we can disregard those and we focus on the larger effort. How long before that turns into 1 million votes? Oh, that's just a rounding effort. We can just disregard that and go back to the original, right? So it's hard for people to really see the value of their vote. It's also very hard because most people only participate in an election once every 4 years.
Yeah.
Not realizing that there are elections that happen all the time where just a few hundred votes are all the votes that are going to be collected.
Right.
Right. So we have to exercise that right as citizens to vote, because today's vote for the lowest level person shapes how the future votes are going to go.
Your school board leader, right? That matters. Your mayor, your city councilman.
Absolutely.
Like, all those things matter. And, everybody's, I think, only focused, at least large in part, on the president of the United States, which is, a role. But certainly the other ones are very important as well.
Yeah. And if you look at our election right now, right, America is facing a very important choice in the current election, because we have to choose between a president that represents a future of change from the old ways, or a president that is going to reinforce the old ways, right? And there are no two bigger representatives than Donald Trump and Kamala Harris for breaking the old norms or keeping the old norms.
Yeah, I mean, you got Kamala Harris, who's campaigning on change, but she's even said that she's content with the policies that they've had the last 3.5 years and doesn't plan to change any. So that's not real change. And the really interesting thing about this election is people don't have to guess what these candidates are going to do, because they both have been there. So if you really get past the individuals and the personalities and the likes and dislikes of those, people, you could actually go back and inventory and look at the decisions that they have made and been part of.
And you can see too that the reason this election is so close isn't because there's so many people who like both candidates.
Right.
The election is so close because the dedicated base of both sides is pretty equal. It's all the people in the middle, all those purple independent Americans who are true blue independents, who will vote their conscience, who will vote for the policies that matter to them. Those people are the ones that are going to determine the outcome.
Yeah.
It's not the far left. It's not the far right. It's not the people who believe that the candidate is, heaven sent. It's the people who really are practical and pragmatic about thinking where they want their country to go. And that's what makes it hard. It's what makes it hard to predict who's next.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good thing. I don't believe the polls, by the way, but
just because you're smart enough. You're
exactly.
smart enough to know the flaws of polls.
I don't believe the polls. I believe the polls are staging for any kind of election interference or any kind of corruption in our election system. I think the polls kind of pre-stage for that. So you did your time in the agency, and you leave before retirement. Why'd you leave?
So I left for a number of reasons. I discovered in my career with CIA the flaws of CIA, the overclassification, the fundamental flaw in hierarchy, the grandfathering system of promotion, right? It wasn't a meritocracy where good jobs get you rewarded. It was a sandbox where playing nice with the bigger kids got you promoted. And I didn't want to be part of that. I also woke up to the fact that the very same training that I was taught to use against foreigners, the manipulation, the psychological techniques, the Rice method of using people's motivations against them. Yeah. That was the way of management. That was what senior leaders did to junior leaders, what mid-careerists did to junior careerists. That was the process. That was the culture.
Yeah.
And I looked at myself, and I was married at the time to my wife, and I looked at my wife, and we were pregnant with our first child, and I was like, hey, do we really want to dedicate our future, which now includes the future of our child, do we want to dedicate our future to a career where all we're doing is just going through this rinse, wash, repeat cycle and not actually trying to advance the mission?
You're both agents at this time.
We're both agency at the time, correct. Right? Because for me, The moment my wife and I were pregnant, everything changed.
Yeah.
And then the moment that child was born, everything just cemented the original change, right? Because once you have a little person, like, everything is for them. And then you want more little people, and everything becomes for them too. And when we went to the agency, before we left, we went to the agency and we said, hey, we had just come off of a very big case, a very successful operation. We're hoping to get an approval from CIA actually in the next few weeks that lets us tell the story. But we went to CIA coming off the heels of this very successful operation. We were like, we would like
Oh, wait, I want to pause on that. You're hoping to get approval from the CIA to tell this story publicly.
Correct.
Of this. Okay.
Correct, because that's one of the things that we have to do. Anything about our operational background needs prior approval first. I'm sure you're familiar with that for yourself.
Yeah, just like a Pentagon review for my books and stuff like that.
Correct. So we've got to do the same thing. So we're very, very close. It's been multiple years trying to get the approval, but we're closer than we've ever been. But the reason I say that is just because we were coming back to CIA with a lot of what we call WASTA, influence, high referral rates. Like, people wanted to work with us. We were coming off of a big operation. So we went to CIA and we were like, hey, give us a simple assignment. Give us something like light duty for 3 years so we can have our child, raise him till he was 2, and then put him in daycare. That's all we were asking for, was just give us light duty. Send us to like some US CONUS place to work with FBI. Send us to like the tech lab where we can help tech officers develop new technology. Give us light duty for 3 years. Because what we were really saying was, give us an easy job so we can shuffle our child off to some childcare and never worry about him again, so we can come back and do the mission. But that's not what we meant, right? We were so blind to the mission that we were at that moment willing to trade our lifetime as parents to become lifetime operators. And thank God CIA looked at us and said, no, we're not going to give you light duty. You can find a nanny to take care of your child because we need you over here and we need you to do this. And it became very clear to us that we were just pawns in a game. And CIA didn't care about us as individuals, didn't care about us as a couple, didn't care about us as parents, right? They just wanted us to keep grinding and grinding and grinding until the day came that we were totally disposable. Yeah. And it became so clear in that moment that not only was CIA using us, but we were letting them use us, using the same techniques and tactics that they taught us at the farm. And it was a moment of clarity that changed my life forever, because I went back to my wife and I was like, we're done here. We can't stay here, because we would be giving up on the best part of our future, giving up on the chance to be parents, giving up on the chance to be married and committed to each other, because we'll always be married to the agency and committed to the mission first, right? CIA even has a saying, mission first, family always, which is just a fancy way of saying family second.
Yeah. Man, I'm so glad to hear you guys recognize that, because so many people don't. I even shared a personal story with you before we started the show of me not coming aware of that till the job crushed me, and then I realized, well, they're really not here for me.
Yeah.
I felt very used and taken advantage of, and so many people don't realize that until you're washed up and they're done with you, and then they kind of cast you aside.
And it's so important for veterans especially to understand whatever value you believed you had in uniform is exponentially more when you get out of uniform.
Yeah.
Because now you have all the experiences, all the value, all the impact that you had as a veteran, as a military member, which is something that only 1 out of every 15 Americans ever experiences anyways, right? So few people know what it's like to serve in the military. And now you're a civilian with that whole foundation of knowledge, experience, understanding, context. And you can bring that into the civilian world. And you can use that whether you start your own business as a landscaper or an architect or an attorney, or whether you go into the corporate world and you become a project manager or a coder or who knows what, right? Even a salesman. You're so much more better equipped to deal with stress and change and adversity and hardship than any of your civilian counterparts. But the government does such a bad job of preparing us to understand our value because they look at us as disposable resources.
So I look back at that, and I went through a phase of extreme bitterness and felt hurt, betrayed by the people who I would have given anything for. By the way, there's nothing that I would have been asked of me that I would have said no to, including, and I say this without bravado, like including sacrificing my life. That's how bought in I was. And then to be to exit the way I did and to be treated the way I was at the end, I felt so like used and I felt like a fool, to be honest with you. And so I went through a period of like being real jaded and bitter. But then I went through another phase of like pragmatically trying to decide, do they have to function that way in order to be the greatest tier 1 special operations unit in the world? Do they have to function that way? Is that a necessity to function that way? What would you say to that? Can it be done a different way?
It can definitely be done a different way, but your point of view is the correct point of view. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the institution.
Yeah.
Right? Does the institution really have the tolerance, the patience, the budget to treat every operator as an individual? The answer is no. They have to come up with systems and processes that essentially are like a big sausage grinder. You bring in meat, you pack it into sausage, you clip the sausage at the end. That has to be how they work because they're an institution. What's frustrating to me is that they're not a progressively, constantly improving system. You run a business. It's a nonprofit, but it's a business. You grow every year. You find a better way to run the process. You find a better way to serve your people. You find a better way to serve your customers. You find a better way to run your operations. You're constantly improving. That's how the civilian world works. Constant improvement, even if it's just 2% improvement. They're always trying to improve.
Yes.
The government improves in cycles. This year, we're investing in Deloitte to come in and improve our process. But then for 10 years, we're going to be the same way. And then maybe if there's a budgetary windfall, after 10 years, we'll spend another chunk of money to have, somebody else, McKesson, come in and review our systems and improve our systems. And then 10 more years of the same thing. So instead of constantly improving, it's improving in cycles, which, again, the world moves very quickly. 10 years ago, we weren't using FaceTime. 10 years before that, we were barely using smartphone, apps with encrypted SMS. 10 years before that, I'm pretty sure we didn't even have cell phones that were available to the normal market. So imagine that's just the cell phone world. That's not even counting electric vehicles. That's not talking about the rise of like internet television. The fact that the government might have only had 3 system upgrades in 30 years, whereas for you and I, we have an operating system upgrade every 9 months. That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get out, and you are in this position now to where you've decided to take all this experience that you have from the military, from the covert world of the Central Intelligence Agency, to start your company, EverydaySpy, which we're going to talk about that. But before we do, like, one of the other things you do is stuff like this. You use your experience to help inform everyday Americans on to be more informed and equipped on how to improve their life, to understand geopolitics, understand what's going on in the world, decipher good versus evil. One of the things so I'm going to kind of use that right now as one of the things that's important to me was the Afghanistan withdrawal. So foundationally important to my life. One, I did 8 deployments to Afghanistan. My son did a deployment to Afghanistan. My deployments to Afghanistan resulted in a loss of 15 friends. So that cost from that made the Afghanistan war on terror like very, very sacred to me. And my longtime interpreter, Singleton teammate and friend, Aziz, was left behind in that, which led to me going back and rescuing him. And we ultimately got 17,000 people out through the humanitarian effort. But the whole time I was doing that, the humanitarian effort was one side, but from a military, like, national security viewpoint, I had a really hard time looking at Afghanistan saying, and not believing that the American people were lied to. We were told that we left because we were in this 20-year endless war. But we only had 2,500 troops there. I mean, that's 10 places in the world right now. We have 2,500 troops. We still have 80,000 in Japan since World War II. We have 40,000 in Germany. We have 35,000 in South Korea protecting the 38th parallel to keep the North Koreans from coming over into South Korea. Why would the White House choose to give up the most strategic place in the globe between Iraq, Iran, Russia, and China, being Bagram Air Force Base? Was it just a decision for politics and political posturing to show a withdrawal, or was there foreign influence? Because certainly there was foreign nation benefits. I mean, China wanted the mineral rights in the Hindu Kush Mountains, all the lithium, which is worth trillions of dollars. Iran wanted to be able to move sanctioned oil across Afghanistan to China, who wanted to buy it. There's like ISI wanted wanted to be in Afghanistan. I mean, there's all these foreign benefits from it. Was that decision because of foreign benefits, or was it for political posturing? Am I missing something else?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think you've got both elements, and then a third element that also has to be calculated in there too. There's also the element of incompetence, right? There's certain laws to analysis that apply in intelligence, and you've heard of Occam's razor, right? The simplest solution is usually the correct solution. But then you've also got another one called Hanlon's razor, which is never subscribe to conspiracy, that which can be explained with idiocy. So you can almost always, when you consider the outcome of something, you look at it and say, could it have been a conspiracy? But then you also have to look at it and ask yourself, like, could it just be incompetence? What happened in Afghanistan is a fantastic example of Hanlon's razor in motion. There was a great deal of incompetence. How few troops were there, how poorly it was organized, how often politics took precedence over military action over the course of 20 years.
Sure.
Right? So you have to bake that in as well. Was there foreign influence? Without a doubt, there was foreign influence. But how that foreign influence played out is important. There's very little foreign influence that actually goes directly into the White House or directly into DOD. We have pretty strong firewalls built personally, physically, digitally, that keep foreign influence out. They still get in, right? There's still hacks, there's still violations, there's still breaches. But for the most part, we can protect government officials in the senior levels against foreign influence.
Including the President of the United States.
Including the President of the United States. Right? When the president is a traditional president, when they're groomed by the party, right? Donald Trump is a completely different animal because he was never groomed by a party, right? He's truly an independent thinker, independent action taker, very unpredictable guy.
And so is Kamala Harris right now, right?
Because she was never voted for by the American people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She's exclusively groomed.
Right.
Right. So she's also an animal unlike anything we've seen before. In fact, the one time she did have a chance to be nominated and to win, to even participate in a primary, she failed.
Yeah,
she lost
2% or something.
So my point here is foreign influence is difficult to get into the White House. But where foreign influence is so effective is in the advisories, the advisory councils, the civilians, the donors, the lobbyists that all feed up into politics. That's where it's super dangerous. If you just do a Google search over 2024, how many arrests for illegal foreign agents, right? An illegal foreign agent means an American citizen who's collaborating with a foreign government illegally. They haven't documented the relationship. They haven't documented any kind of cooperation, but that American citizen has the ability to influence politics. There have been almost a half dozen arrests. That's just arrests. 2024. That means there's probably another 2 to 3 times as many that are active investigations. And then there's probably another 3 to 5 times as many that haven't been discovered yet.
Right.
And that's so important because that's how the foreign influence happens. Because some Turkish person is friends with the mayor in New York, which just happened. Mayor Eric Adams was arrested because he was on the payroll of the Turkish government, right? The same thing happened in New Jersey in 2003 with Senator Menendez, who was on the payroll for Egypt, right? These are individuals who are in a position of politics, who are acting on the best interest of foreign nationals who are paying them. And it's nefarious, it's illegal, it's all the bad stuff you expect it to be, but it continues to happen because those people are not as well insulated, protected, or trained as your senior administrators. So that's where your foreign influence really comes from. And it's so insidious because it's not the kind of person anybody would suspect to be an interest. Like, who would have guessed that a senator in New Jersey is of interest to Egypt? Who would have guessed that the mayor of New York is of interest to Turkey, right? Who would have guessed that Turkey, who's an ally, would be operating against the United States? Well, that just kind of shows how mainstream media doesn't really talk about the things that we need to understand, right? Mainstream media is more focused on the Kardashians than on Turkish influence operations.
Yeah. With Afghanistan currently in the state it's in, and we could go down a whole rabbit trail with this. I mean, Sarah Adams and I talked about the up to $40 to $87 million a week going to the Taliban. Al-Qaeda is now went from originally, I think 2 Al-Qaeda training camps to 52 Al-Qaeda training camps. We're giving this cash to, first of all, sanctioned people. Is going to sanction people as cash should never go to them. 4 of them in the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, which is insane to me. Another one is the Bin Laden family. That's cash is going to the house that is holding 3 American prisoners. So with all that stuff, with the United States taxpayer dollars continuing to fund I don't know how familiar you are with the Doha Agreement, but one, I believe that's in violation of the Doha Agreement. And what's the danger of? I mean, this Afghanistan is just an example. What's the danger of the United States taxpayer dollar funding, a country like Afghanistan, knowing that they're in violation of something like the Doha Agreement?
I think this is one of those difficult pills for us to swallow.
Right.
American dollars are used against Americans all the time. They've been used against us for decades. The real superpower of the United States isn't our military. The real superpower is our financial power.
Yes.
It's our dollar.
It's a leverage, right?
That's exactly right. All war is based on economics, right? Wars that turn out profitable are wars that we continue to engage in. Wars that are not profitable are wars that we step away from. President Zelensky, just yesterday, announced to the British Parliament that he's getting pressure from the West to negotiate with Russia. Mm-hmm. Well, who's the West that he's talking about? He's talking about the United States. He's probably talking about the United States and other parts of NATO who are all saying, hey, it's time to negotiate with Russia. It's time to shut this thing down because it's not profitable to us anymore. Right. For the last 2 or 3 years, we gained profit from this. We tested new weapons. We discovered new capabilities. We were able to say that we defended democracy, but now it's an election year and now we have to spin this thing down. And now the American people aren't really as supportive as they used to be, et cetera, et cetera. So when a war becomes unprofitable, that's our main power is profit. So our money is being used against us in Afghanistan. Our money is being used against us when we send it to Southeast Asia. Our money in Africa is being used against us to fund warlords that hire child soldiers that work against us. Like, this is no surprise, to you and I. Good guys get shot at with bullets that were paid for with American dollars all over the country. The flaw in our approach to being a superpower is that we try to force our will with money. But then we don't track
rewarding coercion.
But then we don't track the money after we give it.
Yeah. That's that. We're not following our own protocols, right? We're looking at the reward and coercion, knowing it doesn't work, versus people that are tied to ideology and ego.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right. The first people who went into Afghanistan were being shot at with weapons that were given to the Mujahideen. Mm-hmm. American-made weapons. Helicopters were being shot down by rockets that were given to the Afghan people.
Yeah.
Right? And the same thing is going to happen again in Ukraine if we're not careful. If we escalate this thing in Ukraine to the place where Americans are getting attacked with American-made weapons that were abandoned on the field in Ukraine, and that's what's so crazy. And the drone technology that gets captured, and it's insane. There are reports now of North Koreans in Russia fighting Ukrainians in the part of Russia that Ukraine invaded. So that means because of the decisions that our administration has made in the last 3 years,
right?
Because of the Biden administration, there is a closer relationship between Russia and North Korea than ever before, right? Russia is now trading missile technology and nuclear weapons technology in exchange for ammunition and untrained North Korean soldiers. That exchange would have never happened had we not pursued and supported this conflict in Ukraine as a demonstration of defending democracy. If you read the fine print, Ukraine was never a democracy. Right. It scored like 3 out of 10 on the Democratic Index before Russia ever invaded.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one of those things where we are writing our own demise because we are still executing things the same way that we executed them 20 years ago. We're not moving forward to change our strategy and change our approach and change how we leverage being a superpower. If we don't change it soon, we're not going to be the only superpower for very long.
Yeah, my personal observation in early February of 2022, we were watching this happen. In fact, my buddy C Spray, who does the humanitarian work with me, we were talking and we staged him early February 2022, knowing this was going to happen. And what we were watching is, are there going to be Americans left behind in lieu of the White House mandating our embassy to be closed and the consulate be closed and the troops to be pulled out? Because what we saw was, Putin put 100,000 troops on the border, kind of flexed, and then the White House made the decision to remove our troops, which we only had 160 troops there. But when you think about Article 5 violation, 1 troop counts, right? It's a deterrent. And then we closed our embassy and consulate and moved out. So that gave Putin a green light to come across. And but we did that again, which I think this is the 4th time in this administration that we moved our government out before our American citizens. So we were there, went there and removed Americans out and did humanitarian evacuations of Americans, including rescue of Benjamin Hall, that Fox News reporter, recovered bodies of their team, and then recovered bodies of U.S. service members that the State Department wouldn't get out that were there volunteering and fighting. But, my time and experience, I did 10 trips total to Ukraine doing that. Mighty Oaks in our humanitarian organization that we do these rescues with, the total of 30 trips. So they're pretty much continuous presence. But one of the things that my personal observation is that this was a modern day World War III. Everyone's talking about World War III and potential World War III. To me, this is like a modern day World War III by proxy, because you have 30 countries there. You have Russia there, America there. You have China, North Korea now, right? You have Iran,
Belarus, Saudis.
Everybody's there. This is like a by proxy World War III happening right now and in Ukraine. And I think people don't really grasp the magnitude of what's actually happening there.
It's funny because I think most people imagine World War III is going to look like the threats that came out of the Cold War.
Right.
People don't realize that war evolves, right? What happened in World War I evolved into World War II. World War II evolved into, Vietnam. Vietnam evolved into the Cold War. Like, war evolves, and it evolves out of necessity. So the evolution of war is happening right now on the battlefield in Ukraine. It's going to happen between Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, and the Houthis on the borders of Israel. It continues to evolve because it's forced to evolve. It's survival of the fittest. So World War III, I don't know why people continue to think it's going to look like a nuclear holocaust. World War III is drones and ditches and who can just send the most shells across the two, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and that's what it is.
Like I said, you have Iranian drones there, you have U.S. drones, you have Chinese drones there. The world is participating.
Yeah, the whole world is participating, and it's nasty.
Yeah.
Right? And the same thing is happening in Israel right now. You got the open attacking of religious sites. I mean, Israel's bombing mosques in order to reach Hezbollah leaders. That's not something that we've ever seen before.
No.
Right? And it's in the headlines and it's in the press, and the UN is condemning it. There's open calls in the UN to make a Palestinian state. Like there are voices trying to make a change, but the old ways are still the ways that are being carried out, right? Israel's still executing the way it has always executed. The U.S. is still backing Israel because they're still making a series of pragmatic decisions based off of an old way of doing business. And until we change that, nothing's going to change.
In my book, Mission Without Borders, talk about, I don't agree with the $200 billion going there. I do agree with the humanitarian effort of going in and helping people that can't help themselves. That's why I went there. But I think this war in Ukraine has the ability to be over in 24 hours.
Absolutely.
And I think our White House has the power to do that. But instead, we haven't talked peace. We haven't pushed Zelensky for negotiations. Now he's being pushed a little bit more because of the election. But we've only funded it, and knowing that much of that money is corrupt, is going into a corrupt cesspool of Ukraine. I think President Trump said something pretty powerful in the debate stage when he said he could end this thing as president-elect, and I believe he can. I believe the president of the United States, or even the president-elect of the United States, has the ability to end this thing. And we haven't seen a lot of talk about peace until now.
Yeah, and it's funny because 2 years ago, very shortly after the invasion happened, I laid out what I thought peace was going to look like, what I thought the end of this war would look like. And I was like, it's going to look like Russia keeps the territory it's taken, Ukraine gets to remain an independent Ukraine, Zelensky doesn't get to be the president anymore, right? But that's how this thing ends. That is what we will claim as victory. Russians will say that they are victorious because they kept part of the territory. Zelensky will say they are victorious because they're still an independent Ukraine. NATO will be victorious. Iran will be victorious. China will be, everybody will claim victory because there's going to be a ceasefire. But that's how it's going to end. All of Zelensky's promises of returning the original Ukraine boundaries and barriers from the 1990s, that's all just never going to happen. That is unproven politician rhetoric. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Right? But there was a economic interest for the Biden administration after COVID to turn all of our attention on Ukraine.
Yeah. How much of this is influenced by the military-industrial complex?
I mean, our biggest industry in the United States is the military-industrial complex. So that's what we do. Eisenhower warned us about it, right? It drives so many of our decisions.
Yeah.
So it's a necessary evil right now until we find another industry that can replace it.
And by the way, for those listening, both parties are complicit in this.
For sure.
The neocons in Washington, D.C. love nothing more than a good war in Ukraine. I mean, all the, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, they're making a lot of money right now off of Ukraine.
I mean, how many deals have you seen? How many military deals not just those companies, but the United States? Because our weapons are the weapons that are being bought by Taiwan. Our weapons are the weapons being bought by Israel. We just announced this week that we're sending a specialized high-altitude missile intercept system to Israel, along with 92 troops to man it. So we're now sending troops and weapons to Israel to fight their war against Iran, because their war is against Iran. It's just Iran in the shape of Hezbollah and Iran in the shape of Hamas. But that's, I mean, we are literally sending troops on the ground and our advanced systems there. Why? So we can test the systems, so the Israelis can see our systems at work, so the Israelis can buy our systems in the future. Yeah. Like we are, that's how we operate. Why are we okay with North Korea blowing up the 2 roads that connect North and South Korea? That also happened this week, right? Infrastructure being destroyed. That is a clear sign of a future invasion. Yes. Right? Whether or not North Korea will actually invade, different story. But, you know, Kim Jong-un knows that by blowing up the roads, he's going to get headlines.
Yeah. You start destroying infrastructure. It's a
clear sign, right? So the United States loves that, because guess what South Korea is going to need to do now?
Buy weapons.
Buy weapons. Hey, the market's open, guys. Whether you're in Ukraine and we're lending them for a future lease so that we can gain an economic foothold in Ukraine, because that's really what we're doing in Ukraine. We give them weapons and we give them support so that they owe debt in the future, so that we can have that debt repaid with infrastructure and you know, building projects and whatever else. It's the same way we rebuilt Germany. It's the same way we rebuilt Japan. It's the same way we rebuilt the UK and put them in debt to us for decades, right? That's what we're doing in Ukraine. But everybody else is just buying them straight up with cash.
Just a direct question. Do you believe that President Trump, as president-elect or president of the United States, has the ability to negotiate a ceasefire?
If we want peace quickly, Donald Trump is the best option. Okay. I'm not saying he's the perfect option, but if what you want is, if you want hostilities to stop in Israel, if you want hostilities to stop in Europe, if you want hostilities to stop in Asia, Donald Trump's the only one that can do it. Because Kamala Harris, every decision she makes, she's going to run it past the DNC first. Hey guys, I was thinking about doing this as president. What do you think? And all of her advisors
had to laugh.
So, and somebody else is going to tell her whether or not it works or not, right? Yeah. And that has nothing to do with her youth. It has nothing to do with her race or her gender. It has nothing to do with any of that. It just has to do with the fact that she was groomed by a party to take a role in the same fashion that Obama was groomed, in the same fashion that Biden was groomed. They are not independent decision makers. Right. They do what the party tells them to do. Where Donald Trump, half the Republican Party doesn't like him anyways.
Right. Yeah.
So he's going to do whatever he thinks is the best thing to do, which is why so much of America loves him, because we all want to have the freedom to just do what we think should be done.
And he's demonstrated 4 years of no war, no new wars, and ending.
Honestly, one of the biggest things for me was seeing how little of Trump's policies were changed by the Biden administration.
Yeah.
The vast majority of Trump's policies, about 65% of his policies, were all carried over into the Biden administration. They were renamed. They were renamed in soft names. I think this one of my favorites is that there was like an anti-China act.
Yeah.
That Trump put in place. And then Biden renamed it, kept everything the same, but renamed it something like the Countering Asia Influence Act.
Well, Trump loves antagonistic names.
So, it's as ridiculous as it is.
Yeah.
It's true that if we want to see rapid end to hostilities, Donald Trump could make phone calls and those hostilities could change very quickly, because he practices brinksmanship. He practices bullying like you have to do when you're the biggest kid on the block.
Yeah.
If you're not going to bully, you're not going to be the biggest kid on the block for very long.
No, someone else can come and bully out of that, which is happening.
Doesn't mean you have to be a bully all the time.
We see the trajectory we are. China is the biggest kid on the block.
Right.
Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I forget the president who said it, but you have to walk softly but carry a big stick. That's how we have to operate. If we are going to sit on the throne, you have to be willing to acknowledge that that's what you're going to do. If you don't want to sit on the throne anymore, because, you carry different pronouns and you have different colored hair and you're 18 years old, then that's fine. You don't have to sit on the throne, but somebody else still wants to, and somebody else will if we don't do it ourselves.
We're talking about Ukraine and that's proxy World War III. This isn't just Russia and Ukraine and U.S. funding. China's involved. How is China involved?
It's so important to understand the role of regional players, right? According to the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, and according to all policy paperwork that has been printed and published to the public sector for the last 3 years, China is the United States' single largest strategic threat. It is not Russia. It's not Iran. It's not terrorism. It's not Afghanistan. It's China, because China is everywhere. It's everywhere.
Including owning properties next to our military bases.
Yep.
Flying weather balloons over.
Exactly, right? The technology that funds some of the infrastructure that carries our cellular networks are Chinese companies, right? Yeah. And in China, there's something called a state-owned enterprise system, SOE. That's exactly what it sounds like. It means commercial businesses funded and owned by the state. Mm-hmm. In the United States, we don't have that. We have civilian companies. We have government companies. We have hybrids, right? We have hybrids where the government creates a for-profit company, but it only creates that for-profit company essentially to be a conduit for its own money. So we do have hybrids like that. But in China, the state is part of every company. So when you buy a Huawei phone, when you engage in any kind of social media app that's controlled by a Chinese company like TikTok, the state collects that data. The state funds the next algorithm and the next operating system upgrade. The state meaning the government of China.
Government, right. They don't need an EMP to knock down our grid.
Right.
They already control our grid.
I mean, imagine what happened to Hamas. Imagine what happened to Hezbollah with the pagers that Israel planted, right? Israel actually had to intercept those pagers from Taiwan to plant the explosive, right? So they had to intercept Taiwanese devices to plant the explosive. We outright buy Chinese technology. So if the International Criminal Court doesn't find the weaponization of those pagers as illegal, we are literally paving the way for China in the future to create a backdoor into its own Chinese technology to be pocket-carried EMPs, to be pocket-carried carcinogens, to be explosive devices, right? Because now the weaponization of everyday artifacts is sanctioned. If we allow Israel to do what they did against Hezbollah, that's exactly what China's looking for, right? What we don't understand is that we fought a 20-year global war on terror. China didn't. So what were they doing for those 20 years? They were modeling themselves after us. They were building economic interests. They were becoming a bully in their own small sandbox. And we didn't wake up to that until COVID.
Growing their military infrastructure, all the,
Yep. They own Panama.
Meanwhile, depleting ours.
Right. They own more of South America than we own. They own more of the Caribbean islands than we own. They have partnerships. They have lend leases. They have land leases. They have military exchanges. And that's before we even get into the technology.
Yeah.
They have the largest electrical vehicle market. They are the linchpin among all of our adversaries. North Korea depends on China. Russia depends on China. Iran depends on China.
It's the modern day axis of evil.
It's the modern day axis of evil.
They're the linchpin in it.
Yep.
Land that China's owning next to our military bases, and how's that being allowed? What's the loophole there? They're being allowed to do that.
Well, one of the big challenges in the United States,
right?
You're seen as a person, an independent entity,
right?
Whether you actually are a person or whether you're just a business. And so you have the same rights as a citizen. Your business has the same rights as a citizen, as a human being. So that means that foreigners can essentially open businesses, which is just a legal process, a paperwork process.
Sure.
And then the business can act as an American citizen. That American citizen can buy property. They can buy farmland. They can buy other companies. They can buy debt. They can do whatever they want to do. So they could buy property. China has done this at an incredible rate because while we were spending money in the global war on terror, we were looking for foreign direct investment. Well, what is foreign direct investment? People buying property, people buying land, people buying houses. So we were not going to say no to any money coming in. And a lot of that money was Chinese money coming in to buy American property, American land. If you go through Miami, waterfront Miami is owned by China. If you go through, downtown Chicago, if you go into New York, if you go into, the best parts of California or Texas, you're going to find areas owned by Chinese shell companies. And China sends more foreigners to American law universities than any other country. And guess where they go after they finish their law degree?
Back to China.
Back to China.
Yeah.
Because now they know how our legal system works, so they can do everything above board. China loves to do things legally. They took over Hong Kong by changing the legislation first, right? Very few people realize that in January of this year, there was a new election in Taiwan. The anti-China party won the presidency. Hooray, clap, clap. The legislative body is all pro-China, right? So now there's a huge divide. The House is split, with the majority being pro-China. The president is anti-China. So Taiwan is basically in the same gridlock that we have here in the United States, right? Because China knows how to pass legislation in advance and then follow up with legal movement. That's why nobody could interfere with what they did in Hong Kong, because technically they had already changed the laws.
They don't need guns and bullets.
They don't even need hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Right? They know how to make the administrative side work. And that's just how they operate. That's the slow, poisonous arm of China. That's what happens when you're 5,000 years old.
Things stay on the trajectory they're on. You know, take the presidential election out. President Trump loses. Kamala stays in. I say stays in because she's in right now. People forget that she's not a candidate. She's an incumbent. They're on a trajectory to take the top seat in the world, like to be the world superpower.
According to economists, and so I've got to say this because this is, to me, it's comical. I have uniformed and former military and government service who slap my hand all the time. And they're like, I can't believe you're out there saying China's going to beat the United States. I'm not saying China's going to beat the United States. I'm saying I'm not smart enough to know. But economists
are saying
that by 2030, China will reach parity with the United States. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying as an expert in my field is that when you reach parity, you've lost.
Yeah.
Once your foe is equal to you, all of your advantages are negated. Once they're as good a shot as you are, once they have as much ammunition as you do, once they have as much money as you do, you're never taking the top spot again. Yeah. Right? There has to be some kind of massive conflict at that point, or somebody has to make a major mistake. So what I want to see happen is that we never reach parity.
Right.
Change what we're doing now so we don't give them a chance to reach parity.
Recognize where we are. Be honest about where we are, right?
Correct.
It's kind of the get off the X theory, right? First thing about getting off the X is you got to know you're on the X.
Bingo.
If you don't know you're on the X, you're naive to it, then you're going to get taken out, right? You got to be able to recognize your situation and be honest about it, and that's where we really are. If we stay on this trajectory, China will take the top seat. If they do, 2030 comes, we reach parity, they take the top seat, they become the world superpower. What's it look like for everyday Americans? What's it look like on the global scale?
So the good news is it won't look very different.
Okay.
Change isn't going to happen overnight. And China's, like I said, they're a poison, right? And I hope there are Chinese communists watching this because
they are.
Government's poison. Pardon my language.
No, they're definitely watching. they're hosting it on some of their
on ShinTube, right?
Yeah.
But it won't change overnight. But what will happen is that our children or our grandchildren are going to have to make very real decisions about what language they learn, about where they go to school, about what careers they choose, because they will have to live in a world where English isn't enough and where working for an American top 100 company isn't enough.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's going to happen 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, right? Right now, you and I can look our children in the eye and we can tell them, hey, you're an American and you can be proud because you have the most opportunity of anybody in the world.
That won't be true anymore.
That won't be true anymore. Parents will not be able to look in their children's eyes and say that anymore because it'll be too close to know.
Yeah.
Right.
But China does need the U.S. consumer-based economy.
China just needs people to buy their stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is as the world moves away from the U.S. dollar, which make no mistake, the world is moving away from the U.S. dollar. Yes. We made a massive mistake when we sanctioned the banks, when we sanctioned Russia by taking and holding their money in European banks. We sent a message to the world that your money is not safe. That if America wants to, we'll take all of your reserves that you have in American dollars and we'll just keep them from you. And we'll keep them if your money's in foreign banks, if your money's outside of your country, we'll keep it all. Right? That was a terrible, terrible thing to do because our second biggest economy is a financial economy behind the weapons manufacturing, right? So now the world might need our weapons, but nobody wants to bank with American banks or do business in American dollars. So while the de-dollarization is starting, yes, it's 2% less than it was before. And we have 98% of the market. I'm not disagreeing.
Right.
But it's happening.
Yeah.
And as we choose less dollars, we have to choose more of something else. And one of the only other IMF reserve currencies out there is the Chinese renminbi. And China's very happy to do business in renminbi. And they're very happy to change the price and change the valuation of their renminbi. And they're happy to do business in rubles. And Russia's ruble has increased in value. They're happy to do money, like exchanges in dinars. And Middle Eastern money is good to go. So it's just, it's a dangerous place to be because you'll start seeing that we start having to pay for things with credit cards that say HSBC instead of Visa and Chase, right? It's a scary world. I don't want to live in that world.
Yeah, let's identify it and stop it now. We're in this election cycle, as we mentioned several times today. Like, we see multiple assassination attempts, probably more than the American public knows on President Trump. There's probably been more thwarted than we know about. But are these lone? I don't know, this is speculation, but you think these are lone wolf, or do you think these are people operating with some kind of collaboration with someone else, deep state, foreign governments?
Yeah. So without a doubt, Donald Trump has a lot of enemies. When he killed Soleimani, who was one of the senior leaders in Iran or for the IRGC.
Yeah.
I mean, he's on Iran's top 10 most wanted list for all intents and purposes.
Sure.
So they're constantly looking at ways to kill Donald Trump.
And by the way, I'm so happy he killed Soleimani because
Soleimani was a bad dude.
Soleimani killed some of my friends. So, he just had that one coming.
So, and it was a fantastic victory that Trump doesn't get enough credit for, right? But so without a doubt, there are foreign countries that are plausibly involved, Iran being chief among them. Mm-hmm. But then you also have other countries that are involved that want to shape the American perception of both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. So when you have an assassination attempt on a former president who's the Republican candidate, it just naturally sheds suspicion on the other party.
Of course.
So you can see how all sorts of countries would want to get a piece of that. Well, yeah, because they want to encourage the idea of conspiracy, right? Mm-hmm. If anything, I would say that the deep state conspiracy theories that the Democratic Party was somehow behind this, or the really weird conspiracies that the Republican Party was behind it to boost Trump's popularity. Going back to my basic rules of analysis, completely improbable, right? Completely improbable because of a number of factors. The fact that the bullet actually hit him, the fact that he was wounded, the fact that there were other people, American citizens were killed, at the location. It's just a high-speed chase. All of these things, just the blowback and the legal repercussions of it being organized internally, it's just not possible. And we suck at keeping secrets, right? Conspiracies either come to light or they never come to light because we are just bad at keeping secrets. So without a doubt, it's more likely that there's foreign involvement than American involvement. But then you've got the lone wolf element on top of that. And what we've seen ever since ISIS was the first radicalized group to really demonstrate the value of radicalizing isolated individuals in an automated fashion.
Yeah.
The scary thing about the Democratic Party right now is that they're using some of the same techniques as ISIS without realizing they're doing it. They say they have mantras, they have chants, they have headlines that they repeat over and over again, which is good marketing. That is a good marketing practice. That is a good educational practice. But they're doing it in a way that radicalizes, that makes people believe that Trump is a villain, that Trump is a threat to democracy, that Trump is the beginning of the end. There's chants out there that Trump is a scab and Trump is a criminal. Like, let the justice system do what the justice system does. You are an incumbent candidate for president. You're not the justice system. So it's not your position to label, judge, or especially not encourage. Like we saw at the DNC, the entire stadium starts chanting. They have T-shirts made villainizing a single human being. That is radicalization.
Yeah, that will trigger lone wolves.
That makes lone wolves. And lone wolves are people who want to be heroic, but they're so isolated they don't have context of social norms anymore. So it makes perfect sense that foreign countries are involved in the assassination attempts. It also makes perfect sense that lone wolves are taking action themselves. And then we have to be able to call attention to the fact that the way that the DNC has taken its politics in this election cycle, they've taken it to a dangerous place.
I agree. When you think of foreign entities, of foreign governments, not just entities, foreign governments wanting President Trump dead, to me that speaks to like his value to be the American leader, right? To be the leader of the free world, and because he's such a threat to them. What would be some scenarios of countries that would want him dead? Like, why would they want him dead? I mean, one would come to mind that, not making this accusation, but President Zelensky, for example, who wants that funding to keep coming, knows that funding would end. That's been one of the accusations, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing that's difficult is, a dead former president, unfortunately, it's a media win for everybody, right? If President Trump is shot tomorrow, What happens the day after? President Biden holds a gigantic parade in Washington, D.C., honoring the loss of a heroic president, right? And all the Republicans who scream conspiracy, they'll scream conspiracy. But the purple population, all those people in the middle, are going to appreciate the fact that there's an honorific parade being held for this former president. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party gets to celebrate the fact that their biggest and only threat is no longer a threat. So they've got 4, 8, 12 years more of runway ahead of them, right? And then that's not counting what happens overseas. Now overseas, you start thinking, oh, well, China's going to jump in and try to feed that conspiracy theory with false news. So is Russia, so is Iran. And then you've got NATO is going to realize, well, now we're safe because the Democrats in America will keep feeding NATO their weapons and their humanitarian aid and everything else. So that changes the face of things. But for the average American, it basically means 12 to 15 more years of the same.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to see an assassination of any political leader.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But I can absolutely see why people are suspicious. I can see why why conspiracies are taking flight, because if somebody were to successfully kill former President Trump, we as the American people would be lied to for decades. So
he represents so much money. Like when you look at the UN, his cutting and funding of the UN, you look at the Paris Accord, right? Like, I mean, when you look at the World Economic Forum, like, he represents withholding billions and billions of dollars from people. I mean, this makes him enemy.
For sure. Well, because what he represents is an alternative to the status quo.
Right.
Right. And for like millions and millions of Americans, they want an alternative to the status quo. And that's why Donald Trump he's vocal, he's brash, he's very transparent about what he doesn't like. And that's exactly why so many Americans like him, because
love him or hate him, like, you know, he is getting out there and going against the status quo, and he's protecting the American tax dollar on the international stage.
And he's trying to keep it strong. I mean, that's when you see him speak about economic advantage. Meanwhile, you don't see Biden speak anymore. And when you see Kamala Harris speak, you don't know what she stands for. Right. Answers that don't answer the original question. She doesn't speak about policy that's relevant to all of us. You can see the dance card that she's working from, right? Talk about minority issues, talk about women's issues, talk about, you know, these traditional areas of democratic debate.
Look cool. You gotta look
cool. Look young, make jokes about the old guy. Oh, by the way, your vice president's old as shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's wild.
I want to talk about EverydaySpy. It's your company and what you do now. I guess give an elevator kind of speech of what it is. What does EverydaySpy do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my company, EverydaySpy, is my own personal mission to bring spy education into the light so it can break barriers for everyday people.
Okay.
Break barriers at work, break barriers in business, break barriers physically, break barriers with relationships. Because what people don't realize is that the most dangerous part of being a CIA officer isn't actually the assignment. It's not actually the mission. It's the fact that you're executing a mission undercover. And all undercover means is that you have to live, act, and operate like an everyday person. It's much more dangerous what you sign your credit card receipt, what name you use when you sign your credit card receipt, than it is that you're going to get caught or captured or shot. In order for you to get caught, captured, or shot, there has to be a colossal failure on multiple fronts. But getting mugged, having a car accident, getting into a fender bender, having your driver's license not match up in their back end records, that's the stuff that's really dangerous for an everyday person. So a large amount of CIA training isn't dedicated to top secret stuff. It's dedicated to how do you optimize your performance as a human being? How do you sleep well? How do you have a good memory? How do you keep yourself physically fit without looking like a physical threat, right? And there was so much value for me when I went through CIA that when I came out and I realized that nobody else had ever disclosed these tactics, these techniques, these processes that aren't classified.
That's what I say. Like, the stuff you're teaching is valuable stuff that everyday people could use, and I actually not only applaud it, I think it's extremely helpful to society that you could give some of these skill sets, and not only you give them the skill sets, but it comes from a place of credibility because you've worked as a CIA agent.
I appreciate it, man, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
The people who want to criticize me, they're always going to be there.
Sure, they're everywhere.
And honestly, they're great for the algorithm. But the truth is, CIA changed my life. Yeah. I was a brown kid from rural Pennsylvania who was a bad fit for the military. Like, I didn't feel like a winner when I left the military. I had some nice awards. I had some big medals and, whatever else, but I didn't feel like I was doing anything right. I didn't feel like I had moved the dial on the mission at all.
Yeah.
And then when CIA plucked me up and they put me through the farm and they showed me how my thinking wasn't wrong, my thinking just needed to be tuned and optimized so I could really see the way the world worked, geopolitically, intersocially, through social engineering and social mechanics. I was actually much more in tune with the human psyche than I ever realized. And part of it came from my background. It came from the fact that my father was killed and I was raised by my mother and my grandmother, and I, grew up in a poor household. Like, those are all benefits.
Yeah.
But American social conditioning makes you think that if you're growing up in that hardship, you have no future. It's exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. The people who grow up with privilege lose all context of what the everyday life looks like.
Yeah.
And that's why CIA so heavily recruits from traumatized, younger, like children who had childhood trauma, who become hardworking adults, who have seek a mission and a purpose and allegiance, because we become tools of the trade, just like you saw in your own military career.
I grew up very similar, very broken home, raised primary influence from my grandparents, and grew up I didn't know I was poor because of where I grew up. I grew up in South Louisiana, but definitely looking back now, I was definitely poor, but created a hard work ethic and a grit that I still have to this day.
And you can't buy that. There's no college education that gives that to you. There's no trust fund that gives you grit, that gives you tenacity, that gives you that ability to say that you're going to keep trying even when everybody around you says you're going to fail. You don't realize at the time that your tenacity is what makes you better than everybody else, because they're all going to quit and you won't. So there's only one way that's going to end. They're never going to compete, and you will compete every day for the rest of your life.
What's really interesting, and you probably experienced this maybe some at the farm. I don't know for me going through becoming a reconnaissance Marine, like any other special operations pipeline, you get about 80% attrition rate. And you look in the beginning of you have a class stand up in front of you, and you start picking who you think's gonna graduate. You get it wrong most of the time. I know I went back and was an instructor. I was a recon indoctrination program instructor, and spoken as guest speaker several times at the end of the pipeline for recon, BRC, basic recon course. And it's just so unassuming you're looking at the guy that was like the Division I football player, the water polo, stud, all these athletes, but ends up, the guys who end up graduating is some 120-pound kid from Oklahoma that grew up, or just going to go there and grind hard. Doesn't even know that quitting is not even a factor in their mind. This opportunity.
America's heroes don't look like they look in the movies.
No,
they don't. And I love and hate that. I love that because it means that our true American heroes are out there operating and nobody realizes it. Mm-hmm. But I hate it because it means that all those people out there, all those everyday people who don't look like a Division I footballer, don't look like a water polo varsity player, they think that there's something wrong with them because they're balding, because they have, their index finger is mutated and shorter than their other index finger, whatever. They have a spare tire. They think that they're not good enough. Mm-hmm. They have ADHD, so they would never be an elite operator. They don't understand. They don't realize that America's heroes look like the everyday person.
Yeah.
They have a few extra pounds. They have a little bit of gray in their beard. They don't have perfect vision. They stutter over their words. They don't know, math in their head. That's exactly why they can blend in everywhere and do amazing things.
Yeah.
Because your Pierce Brosnans and your Daniel Craigs of the world, they wouldn't get 5 feet before somebody looked at them and accused them right away of being a spy or a SEAL, and they would never get a chance to do anything important.
Yeah. The culture we're in creates an environment that forces a lot of people to accept mundane jobs, mundane lives, but most people, at least most people I know, don't want to be mundane. They feel trapped. What would you say to, through your training and through this, the stuff you guys do at EverydaySpy, to someone that feels like they're trapped in the mundane, but want to escape that and be the people they were created to be?
So the sense of feeling trapped psychologically, the way that the brain interacts with that feeling of being trapped, it's not about being stuck. It's about not having what we call momentum. Now, CIA operations are all built around momentum. We believe, because of psychological research, that when the brain believes that it has progressive success, it has more tenacity, it has more grit.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody who's ever been in a firefight, they usually talk about the fact that there's a time when the firefight changes. The momentum shifts. And your goal is to try to get the momentum back, because then there's just a morale lift. And with that lift in morale, there comes a lift in capability, a lift in capacity, a lift in skills. There's all sorts of phenomenal research out there that talks about it. So when people feel stuck, what they're actually feeling is a lack of momentum. So the way that CIA teaches us to fix that is to start pursuing small victories. If you're feeling stuck in your career, you need to pursue small victories. Small victories at work, yes, but also small victories in your relationship with your wife, small victories in your relationship with your kids, small victories in the gym, small victories in your diet, because small victories start to multiply and they start to create momentum, and that momentum starts to physically change the chemistry in your brain, the cortisol, dopamine, adrenaline balances, so that now all of a sudden you have more confidence, you're willing to take more risks, and risks are what you have to take to get more victories, right? So it's this compounding process. It's not a hard process, but it's a process that requires consistency and follow through.
Intentionality.
And that's all it is. So if you feel stuck in your relationship, you feel stuck being single, if you feel stuck because you can't lose those 10 pounds, all you're really feeling is a lack of momentum. And as soon as you can build some kind of momentum, you will find that you'll break out of that stuck position very quickly. Not to mention the fact that as you exercise in any kind of area of improvement, whether it's physical improvement or wealth improvement or mental health improvement, any kind of improvement anywhere, you start to have more chemical triggers that fire in your brain that make you believe the next level is achievable. Whereas when you have no victories, the opposite happens. And the cortisol starts to make you believe that change is impossible.
Outstanding. Yeah, that's a really good answer. I mean, and I couldn't align with that more. I mean, like for me, especially if I'm getting down, like I have a heavy job, you do too. Like, man, I have to okay, let me hit the pause button. I feel myself getting down, getting drugged down. Let me go get some little wins in my life, like fitness. Fitness is, and resiliency. We talk about the 4 pillars of resiliency. And I'll break it down like that now that I'm aware of this. I have to have a mental victory. I have to have a physical victory. I have to have a social, like with my circle of people. Like I have to be in strong relationship. I check on that. And then spiritually, like I have to be, reground myself with my faith and my relationship with God. Like all those things, like I'd have to have those little victories, and it brings a confidence back over me. And I'm like, all right, I'm back. Like, let's do it.
Yeah, it gives you that context again. It gives you that reset. You start to see what you really value. One of my favorite things to do whenever I'm struggling with career, with business, with finances, whenever I feel myself struggling at all, one of the first places I go for a little victory is I go to my wife. And I'll just go to my wife and I'll try to have an interesting conversation. And that's it. It could be about current events. It could be about the kids. It could be about something I'm proud of in my daughter's art, or I'm proud of with my son's reading. It could be anything, right? But what I find is if I take something to my wife, a small relationship victory with the person who's dedicated their life to you is not hard to achieve. If anything, the reason you don't feel a victory with your spouse is because you're on 2 different tracks and you're not communicating the things that you both agree on, because it's automatic. It's automatic. Of course, your wife thinks that you're handsome. You know that you think your wife is beautiful. So you don't ever say that because it's automatic. But if you need a victory, if you need to build some momentum, it's not that hard to go up and be like, hey, I just want you to know that you're beautiful. And that's going to change her entire day. And she's going to look back and she's going to do something. She's going to say something, even if it's a joke like my wife, who would just say, shut up, right? You know that they're acknowledging what you just said. You'll see that smile, you'll see that twinkle in their eye, and all of a sudden there's a victory. And then maybe they'll say something to you that lifts you up. And then you'll be able to talk about what's frustrating you at work. And then all of a sudden you feel release, you feel a vent, you feel connected with your partner. And that might be all it takes for you to be like, oh, I just had an idea that's going to fix my problem.
Yeah.
Right?
One of the things that I've noticed about myself and other people, like people are innately like self-critical. Like if we believe, like if anybody really knew me, if anybody knew what was like in my heart, in my mind, like I feel like almost like a fraud, and people like really have this self-deprecating mentality. It's worse than others, but it becomes like a spiral, like demise that people have, and they compare themselves to other people. So they're looking at Andrew and they're hearing you on the show and they're like, man, Andrew's so smart. He comes from the CIA. He has all these, great natural gifts and talents. He has beautiful hair, like all this stuff, right? And but that's not me. Like I can never do that. But you say something that people are wired for success. I often say people are created to be world changers and kingdom builders. Like as someone that's a Christian and I believe we were created a certain way, how can we tap into fundamentally knowing that we were created for something more, we were wired for something more. We don't have to compare ourselves to others. It's within us. We just have to find it.
So I love this because this is a fantastic question that intersects faith and physics, essentially, right? Sure. So physically, psychologically, the average person has 60,000 negative thoughts a day. Just think about that for a second, right? 60,000 negative thoughts in a day. My kids are getting sick. I'm not good enough. My hair's turning gray. 60,000 negative thoughts. Approximately 57,000 of those thoughts are self-critical. That means 3,000 negative thoughts about others, 57,000 negative thoughts about yourself. That's how we're wired. CIA loves that because it's very easy to manipulate people when you know how much they think down about themselves. Right? But spiritually, we know that God has given us all our own spiritual gift. We all have a gift from God, right? And they're outlined in the Bible and they're preached about. And we know some of us are giving and some of us are teachers and some of us are stewards and shepherds. We have spiritual gifts, and those spiritual gifts were granted and ordained to us. The problem is, because we are a secular society, we were never taught how to find our spiritual gift, right? There's a fantastic educational element that's out there in the world of self-improvement and self-optimization called unique ability. Each person has a unique ability in the secular world. That unique ability is almost a one-to-one connection with your spiritual gift. So if we would just be willing to teach people about their spiritual gift when they're kids, help them find it when they're teenagers, help them embrace it when they're in college, mature it when they're professionals, right? Tap into your spiritual gift. That is what the commercial sector calls your unique ability. That is the fount of all of your energy and all of your success. I agree with you 100%. We were built to be kingdom builders because the Father built us in his image.
Yeah.
He built worlds. He built a universe. We are all ordained to build something. And when we let ourselves feel like we can't, that's just the voice of the enemy.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, in a spiritual sense, those 57,000 self-critical, those are whispering in our ears from a spiritual enemy. And we believe them and we've let them feed into us. And the only way to combat that, whether you believe like I believe and I'm hearing like you believe, whether you believe that or not, that's where they're coming from. And the only way you're ever going to combat that is with the voice of truth that comes from the other side, that comes from good, that comes from God and comes from God's word.
And if you don't believe in religion or if you don't subscribe to religion, that's fine. I don't judge one way or the other. But you can't listen to the negative thought. Treat it, if you're not going to treat it as a spiritual war, at least treat it as a mathematical equation.
Yes.
And mathematically, 57,000 negative thoughts sounds like a lot, but it only takes up, they're fractions of a second each. So that means in a 24-hour day, an hour and a half of your total time is dedicated to negative thoughts.
Yeah.
The rest of your time is dedicated to something like sleeping or exercising or, being distracted by TV or whatever else. So just find something else to do with your time so that those 57,000 nanoseconds don't compile.
Yeah. Yeah. And tie back to the last question, those little wins bring that confidence and encouragement and override those negative thoughts because you start seeing something different about yourself and you start seeing your ability. And so all those things kind of tie together. One of the classes you have on your website is a street craft class. I love that, by the way. One of my favorite parts of my job as an AFO, Advanced Force Operator, doing clandestine logistics work, and JSOC was the street craft, the trade craft. I worked undercover previously as a police officer, and so I love that side of things and just how to operate in environments that are non-permissive or where you're in an undercover capacity and in the able to live safely in that environment. One of the questions I've gotten so much as I talk to my story and talking about being in places like Eastern Afghanistan or in the Federal Administered Tribal area or in Pakistan, like by myself, they're like, how'd you do that? Like, how'd you survive in that area? Like in a village full of Taliban, and it wasn't with a gun. It wasn't with, it was just street craft, trade craft, like not making yourself a target. and that just everyday life. So how's that training? Because I love that training so much. How's that training relate to as you talk to civilians and corporate places and in a corporate workplace? How's tradecraft and streetcraft training convert to that?
It's awesome. It converts beautifully, and I didn't realize it until I left CIA. So when I left CIA in 2014, I had to request that my cover get rolled back. But that's a 2-year process, and they can always say no. So for the 2 years after I left, until the day that I could acknowledge my CIA affiliation, for those 2 years, I was basically a guy without a resume, right? I was a 38-year-old quote unquote professional that had a resume with huge spots on it, empty gaps on it, where I couldn't apply. I couldn't give references. I couldn't give phone numbers. I couldn't give mailing addresses. I just had to claim that I was who I was undercover, but there was nobody answering that phone, and there was no secretary there to help me, and there was nobody there to give an employment verification. So what I learned after about 6 months of being unemployed is that if I was going to get a job to feed my 1-year-old son and to care for my wife of 4 years at the time, I was going to have to use a little bit of tradecraft to hack my way into a job. And that was exactly when I realized that this tradecraft stuff has real world application, that you can use RICE, and you can use open-ended questions, and you can use mirroring, and you can use
KLT.
You can use, know, like, trust. You can use all these techniques, not just to win secret intelligence for the US government, but to get a job where nobody checks your references and they give you a fat paycheck. And then when you're actually on the job, you can use rapid learning, you can use memory hacks, you can use mental optimization tactics that CIA taught you to learn your job quickly, to even master your job more than the people who've been doing the job for the last 10 years. And I used the first 2 years out of CIA. I went into corporate America. I went to go work for CVS Health, which was a Fortune 30 company when I started. It was a Fortune 7 company when I left, in large part because of the programs and projects I got to participate in. I just kept climbing up the promotional ladder. I started with CVS making $80,000 a year. I left CVS in 2019, 5 years later, making $230,000 a year, plus having a 15% annual bonus. Not because I was gifted at any specific task. It was because I was using CIA tactics to improve myself inside the job. And when my supervisors saw that, they didn't leave me in one place for much longer than 6 months before they were like, we need you to go fix this. Now we need you to go fix that. Now we need you to go do this. Now it was a lot of work, but that's what taught me that the CIA skills work in corporate America and that they're a viable product to bring to the entrepreneurial world. And that's the evolution of Everyday Spy.
That's so awesome. I was kind of laughing when you said this because I never shared this. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly before. Most people look at my transition coming out of JSOC, Afghanistan, having this kind of crash in my life with being diagnosed with PTSD and then going opening my jiu-jitsu school. But there was a little gap there. In the same thing, I'm like, I get read out of my program and I have a gap in a resume. I just got my MBA, but...
And I know what those 57,000 thoughts were telling you at the time.
Oh, yeah. I'm not qualified to do anything. Like, the only thing I was qualified to do, I can't do anymore. I'm, like, worthless. And so instead of putting a gap in my resume, I took my cover, part of my cover that I had in Afghanistan, and I said, I've been working as an international project manager and rebuilding in Afghanistan, and I built a shallow cover. The references were I had some references from guys from Warsaw. Hey, if somebody calls you, this is what it say. And I applied to be a project manager at a company called Hoar Construction, HOAR, Hoar Construction in downtown Houston. And basically being a project manager for building high-rise buildings. I had no experience at all, but I went in there and I studied up, just like I was spinning up for an op.
Yep,
like
exactly.
I studied up, I learned exactly what I had to learn to know more than the guy in the room that was going to interview me. And I went in there and I got a job. Over guys that had like project management degrees, engineering, like project engineers from A&M. I beat all those guys, got a job that I did not know how to do.
So and, I feel blessed. I feel blessed beyond words every day because my company has grown 300% every year. This is the first year where we're going to miss our 300% goal. We're only going to grow like 220% this year. But I'm blessed because my company is growing and I'm teaching real skills to people who have real breakthroughs. And that's my that's my feedback. The customer service emails I get are people telling me how much more money they made, how much better their life is, how much better their marriage is, how much better their business is. I swim in customer service testimonials instead of customer service complaints. Because just like you saw, it works.
Yeah.
It works. The same way you spin up for an op is the same way you spin up for life. And we don't get very much time to spin up for an op.
No. I'm going to another country and I need to learn a lot about it in a short period of time. And there's methods to learn a lot of information in short periods and digest that stuff. And then, it's got to be, you can't be flipping through your manual. Like, you got to know it. Yeah. Unfortunately for me, I was not in a mental state to be able to hang in that job. I was spending most of my time trying to fight off panic attacks. So that lasted about 3 months for me. But it's really, really funny that I just kind of faded away. Well, apparently the guy who's the CEO of this company, they were just great people, by the way, had been following me through the years. Like, when I left, he watched me fight, and then he saw me start Mighty Oaks, and he even followed me through years, and he reached out to me, and it's like, I knew something was off. Like, he's like, you had never did construction before. You were coming out of the, being in the military, and he knew something was off, but he's like, really appreciated being able to talk to him, and we had a great conversation.
So a funny story for me. So for those 2 years that I was working for CVS Health, I was hired by a hiring manager who had no impact in my day-to-day life, right? Hired by a hiring manager, and recommended by a senior executive. So I was kind of shortcutted into my CVS role. But then my direct supervisor was a new hire, a guy named Tony DiPetrillo. Mm-hmm. And if Tony's watching, Tony, you're still an awesome dude. So he was my first line supervisor. And so he saw all of my flaws very early on, right? Like, I didn't know how to use the systems. I didn't have familiarity with project management. I had to learn it all, right? But he saw right away, like, there's no way this guy was qualified for the job he was hired for. 2 years later, Tony has climbed up through the ranks. I've climbed up through the ranks, and my resume is finally cleared. CIA finally acknowledges I'm a former CIA officer. They send me the verbiage that I'm allowed to put into my resume. And of course, for 2 years, my 57,000 thoughts are, I don't deserve this job. I took this job from somebody else. Like, I know I'm doing well, but I'm a phony, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud.
Yeah.
So I take my resume and I go knock on Tony's door, who's now in a different department, a different office. And I'm like, hey, Tony, I just wanted to share this with you. You probably recognized early on in my career that I wasn't very good at my job. It was because I'm actually a former CIA officer. And he looked at my resume.
Sorry, I lied to you.
He looked at my resume and he was like, yeah, we're never going to say that to anybody again. Just go ahead and take that back. I don't even want to deal with what it means to hire somebody fraudulently. Just don't even worry about it. So, and to this day, a huge part of my success was because Tony was a good boss and a good mentor. And that was not something I saw a lot of at CIA.
Yeah.
And just seeing how little it mattered to him. He didn't care about my background. What he cared about was my work ethic. What he cared about was my willingness and my tenacity in the job to make him as my supervisor successful, but also to make the whole team successful. Yeah. And really that's what it's about. And at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. Give your customers success, give your teammates success, give your boss success. You're always going to have a job. It doesn't matter what your background or what your resume gaps look like.
Yeah. I got two more things I want to ask. For those who are interested in everything you teach at EverydaySpy, EverydaySpy.com, they could go there. But who are the client base? Like, who would be a good fit for the training? What type of training are people looking at being able to go in there and get from you?
Absolutely. So my core heart and soul of EverydaySpy is technical professionals between the age of 35 and 55,
okay,
male and female, but people who have gotten to the place where they realize that their future seems out of reach. They feel stuck because they've been doing what they were supposed to do. They got the right education, they got the right certifications, they do a good job every day, but somebody else keeps getting the promotion. Somebody else keeps getting the better job. Somebody else keeps moving forward, and they feel stuck. A lot of what's happening there is just like we were talking about with momentum, right? And our skills, those people who are that successful, the people who they've already done the hard work to become leaders in their industry, whether they're entrepreneurs or whether they're accountants, they're already experts in their craft. What they never got a chance to learn was the social element, the community, the networking, understanding their other value besides just their specific skill. And that's what CIA does to us. CIA brings us in because we're good at one thing. And then they teach us how to do all the other things that make us more capable and more optimized to do the one thing that we're supposed to do. For me, I came in speaking Asian languages and knowing about nuclear missiles. That by itself doesn't get you very far. But when you also learn about how people come to trust you, and you learn about influence, and you learn about persuasion, and you learn about social mechanics and social engineering, now all of a sudden you're a force to be reckoned with. right? When you learn rapid learning skills, you can learn any language, you can learn any sport, you can learn any topic, you can learn any industry in a fraction of the time that your competitors are spending in their certification courses, in their college university courses, and whatever else, right? So that's my heart and soul, because I can take a 45-year-old who feels stuck and unlock a career for them that leads to wealth and leads to exponential impact and leads to incredible breakthroughs. That is so incredibly rewarding to me. Whereas a 25-year-old, I can help also, but they haven't yet learned mastery of their skill, mastery of their trade.
Yeah, they don't know they haven't totally identified those gifts and talents that we talked about earlier.
Correct.
What about I mean, that's on an individual level. Do you work in a team setting, like to help get a team like moving forward as a unit?
Absolutely. So a big part of what we do on the corporate side, we focus primarily on leaders in corporate environments, not training them on leadership, but training them on how to understand their people. Because a lot of times what happens is companies have human resources, people, and people are often misunderstood. Bosses look at people as like processors. Oh, that's my social media person. That's my video person. That's my, Facebook person. When in fact, what people are is a sum of their capabilities. That videographer has a whole life's worth of experience. That social media manager has a whole life worth of experiences. And on top of that, they have a personality that's empirical, that's measurable, that's scientifically proven. And that personality is what shapes how they leverage the skills and capabilities that they come to the table with. So what we do is with the corporate people is we help them understand the personalities of their staff and then how to categorize their staff and team their staff members up in optimal ways. Maybe that videographer should be working with the social media manager and the Facebook advertiser should be working with the HR department, because their personalities are complementary in those teams, which massively increases the productivity of the team without actually changing any of the people.
It's awesome. I mean, I didn't want to those listening, I wasn't trying to make an infomercial. You guys were able to do this, but I'm super interested. And because I know the value of this to companies, and I want to make sure people know this is available. And I think you just bring such tremendous resource to the table. I don't know anyone else that's bringing this to the table. And I do a lot in the corporate speaking space, and I haven't seen anyone else doing this. So, man, hats off to you. That's awesome.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, hopefully somebody takes advantage of it. Last question I want to ask, and I'll be honest, I didn't expect us to talk about as much the faith aspect, because I wasn't very familiar with where you stood in faith. So now it's made me super interested of where your faith journey began. Obviously, of those 4 pillars, mind, body, spirit, social, of resiliency, and that's what this show is based on. To me, the most important and sustainable pillar through life's hardship is that spiritual pillar. Where do you find that? I've heard a little bit, kind of a snippet of a story about your grandmother and losing your grandmother and acknowledging there's an afterlife there. Like, is that where it began for you? It began further back?
So, I mean, I guess in a way it did start with my grandmother. So my grandmother was one of the 2 women who raised me. My father was killed in a violent crime when I was still very young. And my grandmother and my mother raised me in a household together. And my grandmother, traditional, like strong Catholic Mexican woman.
Okay.
And my mother grew up under that strong Catholicism and just didn't like it. So when my mother had me, she raised me anti-religion. Religion is the opium for the masses. Religion is flawed. Religion is failed. Religion is man. You don't need religion. So from my youngest years, all the way through till I went to the Air Force Academy at 18 years old, I was vehemently anti-religion, right? If you were Christian, if you were Catholic, if you were Mormon, if you were Jewish, I didn't care. You were clearly ignorant and you are clearly stupid because you believe that there's a God, because that's the world that I was raised in. Well, then I go to the Air Force Academy, and my neighbor, the other cadet who lives in the door next to me, is a guy named Meredith Jessup. Folks, if you're listening right now, if you find Meredith Jessup, Meredith with an E at the end of Meredith, he's in St. Louis right now. He was from Baltimore. Just send him a love. Send him a message. Tell him, thank God that he took the time to pour his blessings into me. Because I lived next to Meredith for a year, and I treated him like trash every day. And every day he woke up with a smile. Every day he showed a resiliency to put up with me and my negative attitude about the academy and my negative attitude about faith. And And every day he just demonstrated to me what a faithful Christian kingdom builder looks like. And you cannot ignore it. You cannot ignore an example like that. And that's what really started me on my faith, because that's what made me question everything about my childhood. How can this man, how can this kid be so kind and so friendly and so like capable, so willing and so capable to put up with all the garbage I'm putting up with at the academy, and also bear the brunt of my skepticism and my attitude. And every day he did it. And then the next year he wasn't living next to me anymore. He went somewhere else, and I never saw him again for the rest of my time at the academy. He graduated in my same class, never saw him again, because it was, 3,000 students over the course of however many miles of academy campus.
But he changed your life for literally forever, for eternity.
For eternity. Changed my life, because that planted the seed, and then that question grew on its own. And then another cadet, a guy named Ian Slasnick, invited me to his wedding. And for divine intervention, I couldn't think of a good wedding gift to give him. So when I was invited to his wedding, I decided the wedding gift I wanted to give him was a journal of my journaling my own walk through the Bible. So then I read the Bible every day for about 9 months, and I would journal my thoughts about what I had just read, from Old Testament all the way through the New Testament, all the way to the book of Revelations, cover to cover. And I would journal it for him in this separate journal. And then for his wedding, I took the journal to him, and I was like, Ian, I was saved. I was saved in Isaiah when I was reading the Bible on my own, in my bed, in my room. And I took that journal to him, and I was like, Ian, this is my gift to you. Thank you for the example that you gave me, for the persistence and the resilience, and never straying from being my friend, even when I was not a man of faith and I was the opposite of it. And he took it, he looked at it, he opened it, he saw what it was, and it was like a hot potato. He threw that right back in my arms, and he was like, I'm touched. You don't ever let this go. This is something that needs to be with you forever. And it still sits on my bookshelf now. My wife, when she met me and she saw it, she was like, this is so incredibly special. She transcribed the whole thing into a digital file. She made like 4 copies of it. 2 of them sit in a safety deposit box, because she doesn't ever want me to lose. The fire burns down the journal. She doesn't ever want me to lose the reflections. And that was my spiritual faith. That carried me. It carries me every day. I have my own ups and downs through my journey. My grandmother recently died, which is all the way back to the beginning of the story. And my mom, who is still as anti-religious as it comes, was there at the funeral along with her sisters and her brothers. And this incredible funeral service in this little church in a little village in Casa Grande, Arizona, where my grandmother died, where she spent the last 30 years of her life. And she was such a pillar of faith, but nobody really knew her. She had 12 or 15 really close friends who were all retired single ladies just like her. Half of them had passed before my grandmother had passed, and the remaining 5 or so were at the funeral. And all anybody could talk about was my grandmother's faith, her constant, resilient faith, and how she never wandered from it and she never strayed from it. And I sat there, and I could see my mother's reaction to hearing that one of my grandmother's biggest, most powerful traits was her faith. And it was such a strange juxtaposition, almost like seeing, a black spot on a color of screen. And I don't know how she must have felt being there, but for me, it was this incredible experience of recognizing the impact that my grandmother had through just one thing. Just one thing. Not her career, not her family, not opening a restaurant or just being a woman of such intense faith that people were attracted to her, people were bonded to her, and that's what people remember about her. And it struck me because I realized, I have a chance to do all the things I'm doing now and also be a pillar of faith. And I loved it when I saw the invitation to come speak here at Resilient with you. It was a no-brainer to me, because I was like, this is an awesome opportunity to talk about something nobody ever asks me about.
Yeah. What's that impact been like on your family?
It's an incredible impact, because I am not raising my children with any standard religion. I am encouraging them to explore. I'm encouraging them to ask questions. I'm encouraging them to make their own decision. Because in my journey through the Bible, it was so personal because it was my own decision. And my wife is Buddhist. My wife was raised as a child in a Buddhist household by a very strict Buddhist mother who proselytized the Buddhism to everybody.
Sure.
So when I met my wife, she was strictly Buddhist. And then when we had children, she was like, I'm going to raise my kids Buddhist. And I was like, it's a personal journey, but I love you. And I believe that God has me here for a reason. So I'm not going to argue with you. Fast forward now, it's my 7-year-old daughter, my 11-year-old son, my wife of 14 years. She has read the Bible with me. She asks incredibly intelligent, insightful questions about the faith and about Christianity probably 2 times a week. She struggles to maintain her own Buddhist practice sometimes, but she never struggles to understand that God is forgiveness and that we live in a fallen world and that we have spiritual gifts and that we're ordained to something great. Like, she doesn't struggle with those because Buddhism is all about practice.
Yes.
Whereas Christianity is all about faith. And then my children get to see both of us, and they get to see mom's questions to me about God, and they get to ask me questions about God. And they also get to see their mom chant Buddhist practice. And the kids, honestly, they engage in both on their own initiative. And to me, it's a beautiful thing because they're developing their own opinion, and God's ways are not our ways. So I trust that he will do what he will do.
What he does, what he does. Man, that's incredibly personal, so I really appreciate you sharing that.
I appreciate the question, man. It's like I said, this is Everyday Spy first made mainstream headlines because of my faith. The first time we were ever mentioned was because a Tampa Bay Times author, a Tampa Bay Times journalist, when we lived in Florida, found out from our church that we were 2 former spies that drove a minivan to church and volunteered on the weekends. So the headline on the Tampa Bay Times article still says to this day, former undercover spies drive van and volunteer at church. So our whole company's success started with our faith. So I'm very excited to see how we can grow more with our faith.
That's awesome. Well, to take it all full circle, I believe God created you, and he created you with some incredible gifts and talents that you clearly have. You're a brilliant communicator, by the way. Just not just being here today, just when I've seen you, a brilliant communicator, and you're embracing those gifts and talents for the cause of others and helping other people. And I think that's admirable, and it's an honor to get to know you and do the show with you. So man, I know we were talking kind of offline before, and about doing some stuff together to maybe help some military folks with EverydaySpy to get some, invest back in the communities that we came from.
Amen,
so
man.
I'm looking forward to doing some work with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And
yes,
thanks for an awesome conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who did not hear it, one more time, everydayspy.com. You go there, you go to the show notes below and click the links in the show notes and captions to be able to go and follow all the stuff Andrew does and get part of it. Definitely take advantage of his training. We have some incredible sponsors in the show. If you've seen the show, we got some of the best sponsors in podcasting. Smith & Wesson Firearms, Vortex Optics, Ally Wealth, BioPro Supplements, BioAccelerator, Stem Cell Therapy, Gators Glasses. I don't think I'm missing any. Oh, Holy Water. We didn't have a Holy Water out, but we have you've heard of Liquid Death?
Oh, yeah.
So they came out with a competing brand of it. It's called Holy Water. And it's just water, but it's really good water. And all their proceeds go to good causes of ministries, awesome. Kind of efforts. So they're awesome people. But so we have some stuff for you. We have I don't know if you're big into supplements, but BioPro is a non-synthetic kick off your natural HGH. It's more Eastern kind of medicine side. It's actually velvet off a deer antler.
Wow.
Packaged up to be really cool, like American company. But it's incredible for a lot of things, but mainly for me, what I get biggest benefit out of it is sleep. So I sleep really well on it. And so a lot of our guests have tried this, liked it. A lot of athletes like UFC, jiu-jitsu guys that I'm kind of in that circle are big on BioPro. So awesome. Hope you'll try it.
Yes, absolutely.
And give it a try and see if you like it. And if you do, I know they'd be happy to keep supporting you. We have Mighty Oaks Foundation swag bag. I'm sure you're aware, and you mentioned it already. Mighty Oaks is the organization that I founded, and we've served over 500,000 active duty service members, veterans, first responders. And so it's loaded with some swag in here for you. I think a cap, T-shirt, some of the books I wrote. And so there's your Mighty Oaks swag bag, and then some gaiters. Have you wore gaiters before?
I have not worn them, but I know of them.
Okay, awesome company. This is that pair I picked out for you because I thought you're like way cooler than me, and and these might go. But there's other ones. If you don't like this pair, we have some other ones in the back. But this is Gator's the rig, and you could change the lenses out. The lenses like pop off, and you could change the lenses out. This is kind of this prototype frame too.
Oh, this looks sick.
And those are ballistic.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Oh, let's use them. Let's use them today.
Yeah.
Do I have a face for it?
Yeah, I knew those would look cool on you. Those fit you way better than me. I look like a mosquito with them on. Yeah, but if you don't like those, you don't have to say it here. We'll let you pick in the back.
No, man,
get some other ones.
When you have a busted face, big lenses are the key.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have the big head to cover with it. You got all that hair makes it fit perfect on you. Okay, here's the big one. Smith & Wesson. By the way, the Smith & Wesson team knows who you are, and they are big fans of you.
Oh,
so they were excited when they found that you coming on the show. But Smith & Wesson, you even expressed interest in this. The M&P 9 2.0. It's got this metal frame. It's got a double ported barrel and a compensator on it. Pre-cut for an optic. What we have on here right now is the Vortex Defender Standard, which is Vortex is another one sponsored for the show. So we're gonna have a Vortex for you. But this gun is absolutely awesome. It's even cut for a light on it. So there you go.
This is a beautiful weapon. Yeah,
it's awesome.
I've been eyeing Smith & Wesson M&P for a long time.
Yeah,
and I mean I have so many peers who are from that military and police world. So this, I mean, it's a legendary weapon, and it fits right. It feels good.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. When I shot it, it's a 9, so you're not gonna get a lot of recoil. But when you're shooting fast, you want the recoil management, and so a lot of shooters cut or drill their barrels and to really help to control that recoil, get good recoil management for rapid firing. And Smith & Wesson listens, and so they're like, yeah, people are cutting our barrels and drilling holes in it, and let's do it right. And they made it this way. They put a lot of grooves on it for tactical shooting, and everybody kept changing out the triggers. So they put a performance center trigger in all of their guns. And one of the pet peeves that I had with shooting guns with optics, because I kind of primarily grew up with iron sights, is that the gas and oils would get on. You shoot a gun a lot, you put a lot of oil on it, and it would get on the optic. And Smith & Wesson listen. And their engineers, they manufactured this to where it shoots the gas and forward. And I don't think anyone's done that yet. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure no one else has done this. And it's pretty awesome. So we're going to go out and shoot it today.
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
All right, man. Great to have you on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Oh, man, of course. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share, and we'll see you next week.
That the 2020 election was stolen?
Hey guys, thank you for watching this episode of The Resilient Show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you hadn't already, please click subscribe so you don't miss any future content. We have so many amazing guests scheduled and you don't want to miss it.